The morning air bit at Tom Wallace's face as he moved silently through the dense pine forest of Wyoming's Wind River Range. At 41, Tom had been hunting these mountains for nearly 2 decades, but something felt different today. Perhaps it was the unusual stillness, or maybe it was the way the early October frost clung to the underbrush, refusing to yield to the pale morning sun that filtered through the canopy. Whatever it was, Tom couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't alone out here. He paused to check his compass, his breath forming small ghostly clouds in the crisp air. 6 miles from his pickup truck, and almost 4 miles from the nearest hiking trail, Tom was deep in the wilderness now, just how he liked it. The solitude of these mountains had always been his refuge, a place where the complexities of life in Lander, Wyoming, seemed to dissolve among the towering pines and rugged terrain. The Wind River Range stretched out before him like a slumbering giant, its snow-capped peaks piercing the azure sky. The area was known for its abundant wildlife: elk, moose, black bears, and the occasional mountain lion, and of course grizzlies. Tom respected them all, particularly the grizzlies. He'd seen them from a distance over the years, powerful and majestic. He carried bear spray and made enough noise to avoid surprising one, but still he never forgot that he was a visitor in their domain. Tom adjusted the rifle slung over his shoulder, a Remington 700 chambered in .30-06, passed down from his father, and continued his careful trek up the slope. He was after elk today. The season had opened a week ago, and he'd been planning this hunt for months. 3 days of solitude in the mountains, just him and the wilderness. His wife, Sarah, hadn't been thrilled about him going alone, but after 22 years of marriage, she understood his need for these solo excursions. "Just be careful," she'd said as he'd kissed her goodbye in the pre-dawn darkness of their kitchen. "Remember, Thompson from the hardware store ran into that grizzly last season, and he was with 2 other guys." Tom had nodded, promising caution. In truth, despite his years of experience, he never took the wilderness for granted. The mountains gave life, but they could just as easily take it away. As he crested a small ridge, Tom stopped and scanned the valley below. A small creek meandered through a meadow flanked by aspens, their leaves a brilliant gold against the deep green of the surrounding pines. It was perfect elk habitat. He raised his binoculars and methodically surveyed the area, looking for the telltale brown shapes among the trees or any movement that might betray the presence of his quarry. Nothing, but the day was young. Tom decided to work his way down to the creek and set up near a well-used game trail he spotted cutting through the meadow. He moved deliberately, careful to stay downwind, his hunting boots silent on the forest floor. Years of experience had taught him patience and respect for the rhythms of the wild. The sun climbed higher as Tom settled into position, his back against a massive pine, the meadow and creek in full view before him. He pulled a sandwich from his pack, roast beef on whole wheat that Sarah had prepared, and ate slowly, his eyes never stopping their careful scan of his surroundings. It was nearly noon when Tom first noticed the change. The mountain chickadees that had been flitting among the branches fell silent. The subtle background noise of the forest, the soft rustling of pine needles, the distant calls of birds, seemed to hold its breath. Tom set his sandwich down and reached for his rifle, every sense suddenly alert. That's when he caught the scent, musky and wild, undeniably animal. He slowly turned his head to scan the tree line behind him, and that's when he saw it. A grizzly bear, massive and heavily muscled, moving through the pines about 70 yards away. The bear hadn't noticed him yet, its attention focused on something on the ground. Tom's heart hammered in his chest as he remained perfectly still. The grizzly was enormous, likely a male, its fur a mix of dark brown and silver-tipped guard hairs that gave the species its grizzled appearance. Tom estimated it weighed somewhere north of 600 pounds. The bear was pawing at something on the forest floor. A carcass, Tom realized, probably an elk or deer that had succumbed to a predator or disease. The situation was precarious. Tom knew that grizzlies were fiercely protective of their food sources, especially as they prepared for hibernation in late fall. A bear with a kill was one of the most dangerous scenarios a hunter could encounter. Tom weighed his options. The wind was in his favor for now, blowing his scent away from the bear. He could try to retreat slowly, giving the animal a wide berth. Or he could stay put and hope the bear finished with its meal and moved on. Before he could decide, the wind shifted. The grizzly's head snapped up, its small eyes scanning the forest. Its nostrils flared as it tested the air, catching Tom's unfamiliar scent. The bear rose onto its hind legs, standing nearly 9 feet tall, swaying slightly as it surveyed its domain. Tom's breath caught in his throat as the bear's gaze locked onto him. Time seemed to suspend as man and bear regarded each other across the distance. Tom knew running was the worst thing he could do. It would trigger the predator's chase instinct. Instead, he slowly rose to his feet, making himself appear larger, and reached for the canister of bear spray attached to his belt. He began to speak in a low, firm voice. "Hey bear, I see you. I'm not here to bother you." The grizzly dropped back to all fours and huffed, a sound that carried clearly through the still forest air. It took a few steps forward, then stopped, seeming to assess the strange intruder in its territory. Tom continued to talk, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. "I'm going to back away now. This is your place, not mine." Keeping his eyes on the bear but avoiding direct eye contact, which could be perceived as a challenge, Tom began to slowly back away, making sure not to trip over the uneven forest floor. The bear watched, its massive head swaying slightly from side to side. For a moment, Tom thought he had diffused the situation. The bear seemed more curious than aggressive, and Tom had put another 10 yards between them. Then everything changed. Branch snapped loudly under Tom's boot. The sharp crack echoed through the forest like a gunshot. The bear's demeanor transformed instantly. Ears flattened against its skull, lips curled back to reveal long canines. Without warning, it charged. The speed of a grizzly is something most people never comprehend until they witness it firsthand. Despite weighing over 600 pounds, the bear moved with astonishing agility, covering ground at 35 miles per hour, faster than any human could hope to run. Tom had only seconds to react. He raised the bear spray, finger on them, trigger, waiting for the bear to come within range. At 30 feet, he pressed the trigger, and a cloud of capsaicin erupted from the canister, forming an orange cloud between him and the charging predator. The bear plowed into the spray, but didn't stop. It shook its massive head and let out a roar that seemed to shake the very mountains. Tom stumbled backward, dropping the empty spray canister and losing his footing on the uneven ground. He fell hard onto his back, the impact knocking the wind from his lungs. The grizzly was on him in an instant. Tom raised his arm instinctively to protect his face and felt a searing pain as the bear's claws raked across his back. The animal's breath was hot on his neck, its weight crushing as it stood over him. Tom curled into a ball, covering his neck, and head with his arms, playing dead as his training had taught him to do in this worst-case scenario. The bear swatted at him again, its paw catching Tom across the shoulder and spinning him around. Pain exploded through his body as claws tore through his hunting jacket and into the flesh beneath. He remained still, fighting every instinct to struggle or flee, knowing that any movement now might provoke the bear further. The attack seemed to last an eternity, though in reality it was probably less than a minute. Tom lay motionless as the bear circled him, huffing and growling. It pushed at his body with its snout, checking if the threat was neutralized. Tom could feel blood seeping from the wounds on his back and shoulder, warm against his cold skin. Finally, the sounds of the bear began to recede. Through half-closed eyes, Tom watched as the massive animal lumbered back toward its kill, stopping occasionally to look back at the motionless figure on the forest floor. When the bear finally disappeared into the trees, Tom remained frozen, afraid that any movement might bring the predator charging back. Minutes passed like hours as Tom lay there, the coppery smell of his own blood mixing with the earthy scent of the forest floor. His back and shoulder throbbed with every heartbeat, but he was alive. Gradually, the forest sounds returned. A chickadee's call, the rustle of wind through pine needles, signals that perhaps the immediate danger had passed. With excruciating slowness, Tom reached for his satellite phone in his jacket pocket. His fingers were numb from cold and shock, but he managed to dial the emergency contact he had programmed before his trip. "Wyoming Emergency Services. What's your emergency?" A woman's voice crackled through the small speaker. "Bear attack," Tom managed, his voice barely above a whisper. "Wind River Range. I'm injured. Sir, can you tell me your location?" Tom recited the coordinates he had noted earlier that morning, thankful now for his meticulous attention to detail. "Help is on the way, sir. Can you describe your injuries?" "Lacerations at back and shoulder. I'm bleeding, but I think I can walk." "Sir, I need you to stay where you are. Search and rescue has been notified. They're dispatching a helicopter. It will take approximately 45 minutes to reach your location. Tom acknowledged and ended the call, saving the phone's battery. Now came the hardest part: waiting. He knew he needed to assess his injuries and try to control the bleeding, but every movement sent waves of pain through his torn flesh. Gritting his teeth, Tom slowly sat up. His hunting jacket was in shreds across the back, soaked with blood. He shrugged out of it, wincing as the fabric pulled away from the wounds. Using his hunting knife, he cut strips from his relatively clean undershirt to press against the deepest gashes. As the adrenaline began to wear off, the full extent of his injuries became apparent. The bear's claws had left 4 deep, parallel lacerations across his upper back, and a separate swipe had torn into his left shoulder. None of the wounds appeared to be immediately life-threatening, but the blood loss and exposure to the cold were serious concerns. Tom retrieved his emergency blanket from his pack and wrapped it around his shoulders, the reflective material trapping what body heat he could generate. Then he leaned back against a tree, his rifle across his lap, watching the area where the bear had disappeared. The animal had returned to its kill, apparently satisfied that Tom was no longer a threat, but grizzlies were unpredictable. Tom wasn't taking any chances. The pain was a constant companion now, throbbing in time with his pulse, occasionally spiking when he shifted position. Tom found himself thinking of Sarah and their daughter, Emma, away at college in Colorado. He thought of his simple life in Lander, his job as a surveyor for the county, the small house they had slowly renovated over the years, the garden Sarah tended with such care. It all seemed very distant now, as if belonging to another life. The distant thump of helicopter rotors pulled Tom from his reverie. Help was coming. He fumbled in his pack for his emergency whistle and blew 3 sharp blasts, the universal signal for distress. The sound echoed through the mountains, and somewhere in the distance the bear responded with a warning growl. Tom tensed, but the animal didn't appear. Perhaps it had decided to drag its kill deeper into the forest, away from the strange noises and smells. The helicopter appeared over the ridge, a red and white speck against the blue sky, growing larger as it approached. Tom blew his whistle again and waved his good arm, the movement sending fresh waves of pain through his shoulder. The helicopter circled once, then descended into the meadow, the downdraft flattening the grass and sending leaves and pine needles swirling through the air. 2 rescue workers in bright orange jumpsuits emerged from the helicopter, carrying medical equipment. They approached cautiously, scanning the surrounding forest. "Bear's gone," Tom called over the diminishing rotor noise. "At least for now." The first rescuer reached him, a woman with short gray hair and weathered features. "I'm Lisa with Fremont, County Search and Rescue. This is Miguel." She gestured to her younger colleague. "We're going to get you patched up and out of here. Can you tell me your name?" "Tom Wallace." "All right, Tom. Can you tell me what happened?" As Miguel began to examine his wounds, Tom gave them a concise account of the encounter. Lisa nodded, her experienced eyes continuously scanning the tree line as she listened. "You did everything right," she said when he finished. "Playing dead probably saved your life. Grizzlies often stop attacking once they believe the threat is neutralized." Miguel cleaned the wounds as best he could in the field, applying pressure bandages to control the bleeding. "These are deep, and you're going to need a lot of stitches," he told Tom. "But no vital organs were hit, and I don't see any signs of arterial bleeding. You were lucky." Lucky wasn't exactly how Tom would have described it, but he understood what Miguel meant. A grizzly bear could easily kill a man with one swipe of its powerful paw. The fact that Tom was conscious and talking was indeed fortunate. "We need to move quickly," Lisa said, checking her watch. "Weather report shows a storm front moving in from the west. We don't want to be flying in that. Can you walk to the helicopter with assistance?" Tom nodded. With Miguel on one side and Lisa on the other, he made his way slowly across the meadow to the waiting helicopter. Each step was an exercise in pain management, but the alternative, a stretcher carry that would take longer and leave them all more vulnerable, was less appealing. As they helped him into the helicopter, Tom looked back at the forest where the bear had disappeared. For a brief moment, he thought he saw movement among the trees, a shadow shifting, watching. But then the helicopter door closed, and the engine noise increased as they prepared for takeoff. The flight to Lander Valley Regional Hospital took 20 minutes, during which Miguel monitored Tom's vitals, and communicated with the emergency department via radio. The pain had settled into a steady throb, dulled somewhat by the shock and the basic painkillers Miguel had administered. Tom watched the familiar landscape pass beneath them, the rugged mountains giving way to foothills, then to the high plains. Surrounding Lander. He had spent his entire life in this part of Wyoming, but he had never seen it from quite this perspective before. There was something humbling about viewing the vast wilderness from above, knowing firsthand just how small and vulnerable humans were in that unforgiving terrain. The helicopter landed on the hospital's pad, where a trauma team was waiting. Tom was transferred to a gurney and wheeled rapidly into the emergency department, bright lights overhead and concerned faces surrounding him. The transition from the quiet solitude of the mountains to the controlled chaos of the hospital was disorienting. Dr. Abigail Chen, the emergency physician on duty, listened to Tom's account of the attack while examining his wounds. "You're going to need surgical debridement and closure," she told him. "Bear claws carry a lot of bacteria. We need to clean these wounds thoroughly to prevent infection." Tom nodded, already anticipating the call to Sarah. She would be frantic, and he hated to worry her, but there was no hiding this. "My wife," he began. "Already notified," a nurse informed him. "Standard procedure for trauma cases. She's on her way." The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. Tom was taken to an operating room where his wounds were thoroughly cleaned, debrided and sutured under local anesthesia. Dr. Chen explained each step as she worked, her calm voice a counterpoint to the stinging pain of the procedure. "The lacerations on your back are deep, but they missed your spine," she told him. "The shoulder wound is more complex. Some muscle damage there that will take time to heal. You're looking at about 80 stitches total." Tom winced as she inserted another suture. "Will I have full range of motion?" "With proper physical therapy." "Yes, but recovery will take time, Mr. Wallace. These aren't minor injuries." As Dr. Chen finished the last sutures, a nurse informed Tom that Sarah had arrived and was waiting anxiously in the family room. "She's pretty upset," the nurse added. "Apparently she got quite a shock when she took the call from the hospital." Tom could imagine. Sarah had always supported his hunting trips, but not without reservation. This incident would undoubtedly fuel those concerns. When they finally wheeled him into a private room, Sarah was waiting, her face pale and drawn. At 40, she was still as beautiful to Tom as the day they'd met in high school, auburn hair now showing strands of gray-green, eyes that could flash with temper or soften with compassion. Right now, those eyes were filled with worry and relief. "Oh, Tom," she whispered, carefully taking his hand, mindful of the IV line. "When they called, I thought—" "I'm okay," he assured her, though okay was a relative term at the moment. The bear could have done a lot worse. Sarah's expression shifted from relief to exasperation. "That's not exactly comforting, Tom. You could have been killed out there, all alone." Before Tom could respond, the door opened and two men entered. One wore the uniform of the Wyoming Game and Fish Department. The other was in civilian clothes but carried himself with the unmistakable posture of law enforcement. "Mr. Wallace, I'm Ranger Jack Reeves with Game and Fish, and this is Sheriff Deputy Mark Youngblood. We'd like to ask you a few questions about the bear encounter, if you're up to it." Tom nodded, and Sarah moved to a chair beside the bed, her expression making it clear she wasn't going anywhere. Ranger Reeves pulled out a notebook while Deputy Youngblood leaned against the wall, observing. "Can you describe the bear?" Reeves asked. Tom closed his eyes briefly, the image of the grizzly rising onto its hind legs still vivid in his mind. "Male grizzly, I'd say. 6, maybe 700 pounds. Dark brown with silver-tipped fur. No distinguishing marks that I noticed." "And can you walk us through exactly what happened, starting from when you first spotted the bear?" Tom recounted the encounter in detail. The bear with its kill, the wind shift, his attempt to back away, and the charge that followed his misstep. Reeves nodded occasionally, making notes. "You mentioned the bear was feeding on a carcass. Could you tell what it was?" "Not with certainty. From the size, probably an elk or deer. And you were hunting alone?" Tom nodded, avoiding Sarah's gaze. "The bear spray didn't deter it?" Reeves asked. "Not completely. It seemed to hesitate for a second, but then it kept coming." Reeves made another note. "That's not uncommon with a bear defending a food source. They're incredibly persistent this time of year as they prepare for hibernation." Deputy Youngblood spoke up. "Any chance you could locate the site again? We'd like to investigate, maybe set up some trail cameras. If this bear is showing unusual aggression, we might need to monitor it. Tom considered this. I could mark it on a map, but I'm not going back out there anytime soon. He gestured to his bandaged torso. Understood, Youngblood said. A map would be helpful. Ranger Reeves handed Tom a topographical map of the Wind River Range, and Tom studied it carefully before marking the location of the encounter. It's about 6 miles northeast of the Cold Springs trailhead, near Beaver Creek. Reeves nodded. That's deep back country. Not many hikers go that far, especially this time of year, but we'll post warnings at the trailheads anyway. Do you think the bear will attack someone else? Sarah asked, her voice tight. Reeves considered the question. Bear behavior is complex, Mom. This sounds like a defensive attack. The bear was protecting a food source and felt threatened. It's not the same as a predatory attack, where a bear deliberately hunts humans, which is extremely rare. So people don't need to worry, Sarah pressed. I didn't say that, Reeves corrected gently. All wild bears should be considered dangerous and given a wide berth, but we don't typically remove or euthanize a bear for a defensive attack in its natural habitat, especially in a wilderness area. Tom understood the ranger's position. The mountains were the bear's home, not his. He had been the intruder. After asking a few more questions about the specific location and the bear's behavior, Reeves and Youngblood prepared to leave. At the door, Reeves turned back. One more thing, Mr. Wallace. The Casper Star-Tribune has been calling our office. They caught the emergency call on their scanner and they're running a story on the attack. They'd like a statement from you if you're willing. Tom sighed. The last thing he wanted was publicity, but he understood the public interest in bear encounters. Tell them I said to respect their turf. The bears were here long before us. Reeves nodded. Good advice. Get some rest, Mr. Wallace. We'll be in touch if we have any more questions. After they left, Sarah moved her chair closer to the bed. You're never hunting alone again, she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. Never. Tom reached for her hand. I've been thinking the same thing. Thompson from the hardware store might be interested in partnering up. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. Do you have any idea what went through my mind when the hospital called? They said bear attack and I thought she couldn't finish. I know, Tom said softly. I'm sorry for putting you through that. They sat in silence for a while, the steady beep of the heart monitor and the muted hospital sounds filling the room. Finally, Sarah spoke again. What was it like when you saw it? Tom considered the question. How could he explain the mix of terror and awe he had felt? It was like looking at something from another time, he said finally. Something powerful and ancient that doesn't care about human rules or boundaries. In that moment, I was just insignificant. Sarah squeezed his hand. Not to me. The pain medication was beginning to take effect, making Tom's thoughts drift. I keep thinking about how fast it moved, he murmured. 1 second it was just watching me, the next it was right there. No hesitation. Try not to think about it now, Sarah advised. You need to rest. But as Tom drifted toward sleep, the image of the bear rising onto its hind legs, silhouetted against the forest, stayed with him. He knew it would be a long time before he could enter the woods without looking over his shoulder, without feeling that primal fear deep in his bones. The next morning, Tom awoke to find Dr. Chen checking his vitals. How's the pain? She asked. Manageable, Tom replied, though in truth every movement sent stabbing pains through his back and shoulder. I'm going to prescribe some stronger pain medication for you to take at home, Dr. Chen said. Assuming everything looks good, we can discharge you this afternoon, but you'll need someone to help you with dressing changes and daily activities for at least a week. Sarah, who had dozed off in the chair beside the bed, stirred at this. I'll take care of him, she said, stretching her stiff neck. Dr. Chen smiled. I don't doubt it, but don't hesitate to call if you have any concerns. Increased pain, redness, or drainage from the wounds could indicate infection, which is our biggest concern with animal attacks. After Dr. Chen left, a hospital volunteer arrived with a copy of the Casper Star-Tribune. Thought, you might want to see this, he said, handing the paper to Tom. The headline on the front page read, Local Hunter Survives Grizzly Attack in Wind River Range. Below was a stock photo of a grizzly bear, not the one that had attacked Tom, but menacing nonetheless. The article quoted Ranger Reeves describing the incident as a defensive attack by a bear protecting its food source, and included Tom's terse advice to respect their turf. Tom scanned the article, which was largely accurate but sensationalized the encounter somewhat. The reporter had spoken to Dr. Chen, who described Tom's injuries as serious but not life-threatening, and to several local hunters who expressed concern about increasing bear populations in the area. The article concluded with a statement from the Wyoming Game and Fish Department, reminding hunters and hikers about proper bear safety measures, including traveling in groups, carrying bear spray, and making noise while moving through bear country. Sarah read the article over Tom's shoulder. "At least they got the facts mostly right," she commented. "Yeah," Tom agreed, "but they make it sound like I was in a cage match with the thing." A knock at the door interrupted them. A nurse entered, followed by Emma, their 19-year-old daughter. Emma rushed to the bed, her eyes wide with concern. "Dad, Mom called me last night, but they wouldn't let me talk to you, and I couldn't get a flight until this morning," and she stopped, taking in the bandages visible above Tom's hospital gown. "Oh my God, Dad, it's not as bad as it looks," Tom assured her, though he wasn't entirely convinced of that himself. Emma's eyes filled with tears. "Mom said a bear attacked you." "It did, but I'm okay. I'll be home this afternoon." Emma shook, her head, dark hair so like her mother's, swinging with the movement. "I can't believe this happened. All those times you've gone hunting and nothing, and then—" She wiped at her eyes. "I was so scared, Dad." Tom reached for her hand. "I'm sorry I worried you, Em. And sorry you had to fly all the way back from Colorado." "Don't be ridiculous," Emma said fiercely. "Where else would I be?" The rest of the morning passed with visits from hospital staff, a physical therapist who explained the exercises Tom would need to do once his wounds had healed sufficiently, a nurse who demonstrated wound care techniques to Sarah, and Dr. Chen, who returned with discharge papers and prescriptions. "Remember," Dr. Chen emphasized, "any signs of infection, increased pain, redness, swelling, or drainage, call immediately or come to the emergency room. Bear claws can introduce deep bacteria, and despite our best efforts at cleaning the wounds, infection is still a risk." By early afternoon, Tom was dressed in loose clothing that Sarah had brought from home, his back and shoulder heavily bandaged. A nurse helped him into a wheelchair, hospital policy for all discharges, and wheeled him to the main entrance where Sarah had pulled up their SUV. The drive home through the familiar streets of Lander was surreal. Everything looked exactly as it had when Tom had left for his hunting trip 2 days ago, and yet everything felt different. He found himself studying the mountains that rose to the east of town, wondering if he would ever view them the same way again. Their home, a modest 2-story house on a quiet street lined with cottonwood trees, had never looked so welcoming. As Sarah helped him from the car, Mrs. Johnson from next door hurried over, concern etched on her elderly face. "Tom Wallace, I just read about what happened in the paper. A bear attack. Are you all right?" "I'm doing fine, Mrs. Johnson," Tom assured her. "Just some stitches and bruises." "Well, I never," she said, shaking her head. 30 years I've lived here, and I've never heard of such a thing happening to someone from town. Bears should stay in the mountains where they belong." Tom didn't have the energy to explain that he had been in the bear's territory, not the other way around. He just nodded and allowed Sarah and Emma to help him into the house. Inside, everything was familiar and comforting. The worn leather, couch, the stone fireplace, the family photos lining the walls. Yet Tom felt like a stranger, as if he had returned from much farther away than the Wind River Range. Emma helped him settle onto the couch, while Sarah went to prepare his medication. "Do you need anything, Dad?" Emma asked, hovering anxiously. "Just sit with me for a bit," Tom said, patting the couch beside him. Emma sat, careful not to jostle him. "Are you going to tell me what really happened? Mom wouldn't give me details." Tom considered how much to share. Emma wasn't a child anymore, but he didn't want to frighten her unnecessarily. Still, the truth had its own value. "I was hunting," he began, "and I came across a grizzly with a kill. The wind shifted. It caught my scent and it charged. I tried the bear spray, but it didn't stop completely. Then I fell, and it was on me." Emma's eyes widened. "What was it like when it was attacking you?" Tom thought back to those terrifying moments. "Honestly, it was like being hit by a truck. The power behind those swipes." He shook his head. "I've hunted all my life, Em, but I've never felt so insignificant." "Were you scared?" "Terrified," Tom admitted. "But I also knew what to do, play dead, protect my neck and head, and eventually it lost interest." "Why didn't it kill you?" Emma asked, her voice small. "Because it wasn't hunting me," Tom explained. "It was defending its food, its territory. Once I wasn't moving, I wasn't a threat anymore. Sarah returned with water and pills. That's enough bear talk for now, she said firmly. You need to rest, Tom. The evening passed quietly. Emma cooked dinner, her specialty spaghetti with Sarah's home-canned tomato sauce, and they ate in the living room, Tom propped carefully on the couch. After dinner, a few neighbors stopped by, drawn by the newspaper story, bringing casseroles and concerned questions. Tom answered politely but briefly, fatigue and pain making conversation difficult. By 9 o'clock, he was ready for bed. The simple act of climbing the stairs to the bedroom seemed monumental, each step sending fresh waves of pain through his injured back and shoulder. With Sarah's help, he managed to change into pajama bottoms, leaving his torso bare except for the bandages. As he carefully lowered himself onto the bed, Tom caught sight of himself in the dresser mirror. The white bandages stood out starkly against his tanned skin, wrapping around his torso and left shoulder. In a week or two, those bandages would come off, revealing the beginnings of what would become permanent scars, the mark of the grizzly, written in his flesh. Sarah helped him settle onto his right side, positioning pillows to support his wounded back. Comfortable? She asked. As much as I can be, Tom replied. Sarah slipped into bed beside him, careful not to disturb his position. What are you thinking about? She asked after a moment of silence. Tom sighed. About whether I'll ever go back into those mountains again. You don't have to decide that now. I know, but I keep thinking about the bear. It's still out there going about its bear business. Probably hasn't given me another thought. And here I am, completely changed by the encounter. Sarah was quiet for a moment. Maybe that's how it should be, she said finally. Maybe we need to be reminded sometimes that we're not as in control as we think we are. Tom considered this. You might be right. I've spent 20 years in those mountains thinking I understood them, but there's a whole world out there that exists without any reference to human rules or expectations. That doesn't mean you can't go back, Sarah said, just that you'll go back different. Tom reached for her hand in the darkness. When did you get so wise? I've always been wise. You've just been too busy being a mountain man to notice. Tom chuckled, wincing as the movement pulled at his stitches. I love you, you know that? I know, Sarah said softly. Now get some. Sleep. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. Tom closed his eyes, but sleep was elusive. Every time he began to drift off, he would see the bear rising onto its hind legs, powerful and primeval. He would feel the weight of it pressing him into the forest floor, smell its wild musk, hear its huffing breath, and then he would jerk awake, heart racing, the pain in his back flaring. Around midnight, he carefully eased himself out of bed, trying not to wake Sarah. He made his way downstairs to the kitchen, where he filled a glass with water and took another pain pill. Then he moved to the living room window, which faced east toward the mountains. The night was clear, the moon nearly full, casting a silver light over the town and the mountains beyond. Somewhere out there, the grizzly was moving through its domain, perhaps returning to the kill site, perhaps hunting for new prey. The thought should have been terrifying, but Tom felt something else instead, a strange sense of connection. For a brief, violent moment, their lives had intersected, and both had survived to continue on their separate paths. The next morning brought a flurry of activity. Sarah needed to go to her job at the elementary school for a few hours, just to get things set up for the substitute, she explained, and Emma was determined to stock the freezer with meals before she had to return to college. Tom found himself alone in the house by mid-morning, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, the newspaper open before him. His story had been pushed to the second page, replaced by news of a highway accident near Casper. The transient nature of news was oddly comforting. By next week, his encounter with the grizzly would be forgotten by all but those closest to him. The doorbell rang, startling Tom from his thoughts. He made his way slowly to the front door, each movement a study in pain management. Through the window, he could see Ranger Reeves standing on the porch, uniform hat in hand. Mr. Wallace, Reeves greeted him as Tom opened the door. Hope I'm not intruding. I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd check on you. Come in, Tom invited, stepping back to allow the ranger entry. Coffee. That would be great, thanks. Tom led the way to the kitchen, moving with deliberate care. Reeves watched his slow progress with a practiced eye but made no comment. Once they were seated at the table with steaming mugs before them, Reeves spoke. How are you feeling? Like I got hit by a freight train, Tom admitted. But I'll heal. Reeves nodded. I've seen my share of bear attacks over the years. You were lucky if you can call 80 stitches lucky. That's what the doctor said. Tom took a sip of his coffee. Did you come all the way out here just to check on me? Partly, Reeves acknowledged. But I also wanted to update you. We sent a team to the coordinates you provided yesterday. They found the kill site. It was an elk cow probably taken down by the grizzly itself based on the marks on the carcass. They also found signs of your encounter, blood on the ground, the discarded bear spray canister, and the bear. No sign of it. It probably dragged what was left of the elk deeper into the forest after your encounter. We've set up some trail cameras in the area, but my guess is the bear has moved on. Tom nodded, unsurprised. Bears, especially grizzlies, covered extensive territory in their search for food. I also wanted to let you know, Reeves continued, that your story has generated quite a bit of interest. We've had calls from several news outlets wanting more details. Tom frowned. I've said all I want to say to the press. I thought that might be the case, so I've been deflecting them. But there's something else. Reeves reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a business card. This is from Caroline Martinez at the Wyoming Wildlife Federation. They're putting together an educational program about bear safety for hunters, and they're interested in having you speak about your experience. Tom took the card, turning it over in his fingers. I don't know about that. Give it some thought, Reeves suggested. Personal accounts like yours can be powerful teaching tools, might help some other hunter avoid a similar situation, or worse. Tom slipped the card into his pocket. I'll think about it. After Reeves left, Tom found himself drawn once again to the window, gazing at the mountains. The idea of talking about his experience, of reliving those terrifying moments, for an audience was unsettling. And yet, if his story could help others understand and respect the power of these animals, maybe some good could come from the attack. The day passed slowly. Tom tried to rest, but the pain and the memories kept him restless. Sarah returned from school early afternoon, bringing groceries and news that several of her colleagues had read about the attack and sent their good wishes. And Mrs. Peterson, you know, the third-grade teacher with the bird feeders, she said her husband wants to go hunting with you when you're recovered. Apparently he's been looking for a partner. Tom raised an eyebrow. Craig Peterson? The accountant? He's an experienced hunter, Sarah defended, and he's very safety conscious. Tom couldn't help but smile. Sarah was already working on ensuring he wouldn't hunt alone again, lining up potential partners. I'll talk to him, he promised. That evening, as they sat in the living room after dinner, the phone rang. Sarah answered, then held the receiver out to Tom. It's Thompson from the hardware store, she said. Tom took the phone when, hello? Tom. Man, I just heard about what happened. A grizzly, huh? That's rough. Thompson's voice was loud and concerned. I'm doing all right, Tom assured him. Some stitches, some healing time. Listen, a bunch of us are gathering at Jake's bar tomorrow night to watch the Broncos game. Nothing rowdy, just some beers and conversation. We'd love to have you join if you're feeling up to it. I know everyone's curious about what happened. Tom hesitated. The thought of recounting the attack again, of being the center of attention, didn't appeal to him. But isolating himself wasn't the answer either. I might stop by for a bit, he said finally. Great. We'll save you a seat. Take it easy, man. After hanging up, Tom explained the invitation to Sarah. You should go, she encouraged. It'll be good for you to get out of the house a bit, and Thompson's a good friend. Tom nodded. Thompson had been his go-to person at the hardware store for years, always ready with advice on the right tools for Tom's various home improvement projects. He wasn't a close friend, but he was a friendly face in town, someone who understood the pull of the wilderness. The next day brought more visitors, colleagues from the county surveyor's office where Tom worked, bringing a get-well card signed by everyone. The pastor from their church offering prayers and casseroles, and Emma's boyfriend Kyle, who had driven down from the University of Wyoming in Laramie to check on her and meet her parents under these unusual circumstances. By evening, Tom was exhausted from the socializing, but determined to make an appearance at Jake's bar as promised. Sarah helped him dress in loose clothing that wouldn't put pressure on his wounds, and Emma insisted on driving him the short distance to the bar. I'll pick you up whenever you're ready, she said, pulling up in front of the familiar brick building. Just call Mom's cell. Jake's bar was a Lander institution, a place where locals gathered to watch sports, play pool, and unwind after work. The interior was dimly lit, with neon beer signs providing most of the illumination. Trophy heads, elk, deer, and one impressive pronghorn adorned the walls along with vintage signs and local memorabilia. As Tom walked in, he was greeted by a chorus of welcomes. Thompson waved him over to a table near the large screen TV where the pre-game show was playing. Several local men were already seated there, beers in hand. "Tom, glad you could make it," Thompson said, pulling out a chair. "Guys, you all know, Tom Wallace, the bear didn't get the best of him after all." There were handshakes all around, careful and mindful of Tom's injuries. Jake himself brought over a beer, refusing payment. "On the house," he insisted. "Not every day we get a genuine bear attack survivor in here." Tom accepted the beer with thanks, settling carefully into the chair. He could feel eyes on him from around the bar, curious, respectful, perhaps a bit wary, as if his encounter with the wild had somehow marked him as different. "So," said Bill Reynolds, a local rancher, "you gonna tell us what happened out there?" The paper didn't have much detail. All conversation at the table stopped as they waited for Tom's response. He took a sip of his beer, organizing his thoughts. The last thing he wanted was to sensationalize the encounter or portray the bear as some kind of villain. It had simply been a wild animal defending its territory and food source. "I was hunting elk up in the Wind River Range," Tom began. "About 6 miles in from Cold Springs Trailhead, I came across a grizzly with a kill, an elk cow, they tell me. The wind shifted. It caught my scent and it charged." "Did you get a shot off?" asked Mike Chen, Dr. Chen's husband, and an avid hunter himself. Tom shook his head. "No time. I went for the bear spray first, which was the right call. A wounded grizzly is even more dangerous. The spray slowed it down a bit, but it kept coming. I fell and it was on me." "Jesus," breathed Thompson. "What did you do?" "Only thing you can do in that situation, play dead." Curled up, protected my neck and head with my arms. The bear swiped me a couple of times, then lost interest when I didn't fight back. "How bad are the injuries?" asked Jake, who had lingered to listen to the story. Tom gestured to his back and shoulder. 80 stitches across my back and shoulder. Doctor says I'll have full range of motion eventually, but the scars will be permanent." There was a moment of respectful silence as the men absorbed this information. Then Bill spoke again. "You going back out there? When you're healed up, I mean?" It was the question Tom had been asking himself since the attack. He looked around at the faces watching him. Fellow hunters, men who understood the call of the wilderness but who also recognized its dangers. "Yes," he said finally, "but not alone. I've spent 20 years hunting those mountains, and one bad day isn't going to keep me away. But I'll be more careful, more respectful." Thompson nodded approvingly. "Smart man, and hey, if you need a hunting partner, I'm available. Been thinking about getting back into it myself." "I might take you up on that," Tom said, and meant it. The conversation gradually shifted to other topics as the football game began. Tom nursed his beer, content to listen more than talk. The familiar rhythm of sports talk and good-natured ribbing washed over him, grounding him in the everyday world of Lander. As the first quarter ended, a man Tom didn't recognize approached their table. He was tall and lean, with a weather-beaten face and the quiet confidence of someone comfortable in the outdoors. "Mr. Wallace?" the man asked. "I'm Davis Blackburn. I guide wilderness trips in the Wind Rivers." Tom nodded in greeting. "Nice to meet you. I heard about your encounter," Blackburn continued. "Wanted to say I'm glad you made it out all right. Not everyone does." There was something in Blackburn's tone that caught Tom's attention. "You've had experiences with grizzlies?" Blackburn rolled up his sleeve, revealing a series of long, puckered scars running from his wrist to his elbow. 6 years ago, up near Gannett Peak. Similar situation. Bear with a kill. I was lucky too." Tom studied the scars, so similar to what his own would look like once the stitches were removed. "Does it change how you feel about the mountains?" he asked, voicing the question that had been plaguing him. Blackburn considered this. "It changes how you move through them," he said finally. "Makes you more aware, more alert. But no, it doesn't change how I feel about them. The mountains aren't trying to kill you, they're just indifferent. Same with the bears. They're not malicious, just bears doing what bears do." Tom nodded, finding reassurance in Blackburn's words. "That's what I've been trying to explain to people. The bear wasn't hunting me, it was just defending its food and territory." "Exactly," Blackburn agreed. "Most people don't understand that. They want to vilify the bear, make it into some kind of monster. But that's just our way of trying to make sense of something that doesn't fit into our human categories. They talked for a while longer, Blackburn sharing his own story and how he had returned to guiding just 3 months after his attack. "The first trip back was the hardest," he admitted. "Every sound in the woods had me jumping, but it gets easier. The fear never goes away completely, and it shouldn't, but it becomes manageable." As Blackburn rose to leave, he handed Tom a business card. "I run a weekend workshop on wilderness safety every spring. Covers bear encounters, among other things. If you're interested in sharing your story, let me know. It could help a lot of people." Tom took the card, adding it to the one from the Wyoming Wildlife Federation in his pocket. "I'll think about it," he promised. By halftime, Tom was feeling the strain of sitting upright and the effects of the single beer on his pain medication. He texted Emma, who arrived promptly to drive him home. "Did you have a good time?" she asked as they pulled away from the bar. "Actually, yes," Tom said, surprised to realize it was true. "It was good to talk about it with people who understand." "Did they ask a lot of questions about the bear?" "Some, but mostly they just listened, and I met someone else who survived a grizzly attack. It was, I don't know, validating somehow." Emma glanced at him. "Does it still scare you, thinking about it?" Tom considered the question. "Yes," he said honestly. "I don't think that will ever completely go away, but I'm starting to see it. Differently, it wasn't personal. The bear was just doing what bears do. I was in the wrong place at the wrong time." When they arrived home, Sarah was waiting up, working on a quilt in the living room. She looked up as they entered. "How was it?" "Good," Tom said, carefully lowering himself onto the couch beside her. "Thompson offered to be my hunting partner when I'm healed up." Sarah smiled. "I knew he would. He's been talking about getting back into hunting for years." Tom told her about meeting Davis Blackburn and seeing his scars. "It helps knowing I'm not the only one." "Of course you're not," Sarah said softly. "And you know what? I'm proud of you, Tom. You're handling this better than I would be." Tom wasn't so sure about that. Sarah had always been the stronger one, in his opinion. Steady and practical where he could be impulsive and stubborn. But he appreciated her words nonetheless. As Emma said goodnight and headed upstairs, Tom found himself thinking about the cards in his pocket, from the Wildlife Federation and now from Blackburn. The idea of sharing his story, of turning a terrifying experience into something educational, was beginning to appeal to him. "I might do some talks," he said to Sarah. "About bear safety. A couple of people have asked me." Sarah nodded, not looking up from her quilting. "I think that's a good idea. Might help you process it too." "Maybe." Tom watched her hands moving deftly among the fabric pieces. "What do you think about me going back? To hunting, I mean." Now Sarah did look up, her expression serious. "I think it's part of who you are, Tom. I'd never ask you to give it up, but I do ask that you be more careful. Hunt with a partner. Carry bear. Spray, let me know exactly where you'll be and when you'll be back." "All reasonable requests, Tom." "Agreed. And I think," Sarah hesitated, "I think maybe I should learn to hunt too. Not because I particularly want to, but because I want to share that part of your life. Understand it better." Tom stared at her, surprised. Sarah had accompanied him on fishing trips over the years, but had never expressed interest in hunting. "Really? You'd do that?" "I would," she said simply. "For you." The offer touched Tom deeply. "We can start small," he said. "Day trips close to town. See if you like it." Sarah nodded, returning to her quilting. Tom watched her for a while longer, marveling at the unexpected ways life could change in an instant. 3 days ago, he had been a solitary hunter tracking elk through the mountains. Now, he was a bear attack survivor, contemplating hunting partnerships and educational talks. That night, for the first time since the attack, Tom slept without nightmares. The bear was still there in his dreams, rising onto its hind legs against the forest backdrop, but the overwhelming terror had been replaced by something more complex: respect, caution, even a grudging sense of kinship. Both he and the bear were simply living their lives according to their natures, occasionally intersecting in ways neither could fully comprehend. In the morning, Tom stood before the bathroom mirror, carefully removing the bandages as Dr. Chen had instructed. The wounds were still angry and red, the stitches black against his skin, but they were clean with no signs of infection. As he gingerly washed around the sutures, Tom studied the pattern of lacerations that would eventually become scars. 4 parallel lines across his upper back, another set across his left shoulder. The marks of the grizzly would be with him forever, visible reminders of a moment when the carefully constructed boundaries between wilderness and civilization had dissolved. Yet Tom found he didn't mind. The scars would tell a story, not just of pain and fear, but of survival and respect, of a man who had entered the bear's domain and had been allowed ultimately to leave it again. As he began the slow, careful process of rebandaging the wounds, Tom's gaze drifted to the window and the mountains beyond. Somewhere out there, the grizzly continued its preparation for winter, hunting, eating, following the ancient rhythms of its species. Their paths had crossed briefly, violently, and now diverged again. But Tom knew that when he eventually returned to those mountains, it would be with a newfound awareness of his place in them, not as a conqueror or even a steward, but as a visitor in a realm where human concerns were secondary to the brutal, beautiful simplicity of survival. He would carry the bear with him, not just in the scars on his body, but in a deeper, more fundamental understanding of what it meant to be wild. For now, though, he had healing to do. Tom finished with the bandages and made his way downstairs, where the smell of coffee and the sounds of Sarah and Emma talking in the kitchen welcomed him back to the human world, changed perhaps, but intact. And for that, despite everything, he was grateful. Now let's move on to the story of the next survivor. The sunlight filtered through the dense canopy of oak and maple trees, casting dappled shadows across the forest floor of Pennsylvania's Pocono Mountains. Megan Foster tucked a strand of chestnut hair behind her ear as she spread a red and white checkered blanket over the wooden picnic table. At 35, she had the energetic demeanor of someone who had mastered the art of balancing a demanding job as a high school science teacher with the even more demanding job of motherhood. Her hazel eyes scanned the picnic area, taking in the serene beauty of the forest while simultaneously keeping track of her two children, 8-year-old Emma and 6-year-old Tyler, who were exploring the edge of the clearing, collecting pine cones and interesting rocks for their ever-growing nature collection. "Kids, don't go too far," Megan called out, her voice carrying across the clearing. "Stay where I can see you." "We won't, Mom," Emma replied, her blonde ponytail bobbing as she crouched to examine something on the ground. Tyler, a smaller version of his father with the same dark hair and thoughtful brown eyes, was already heading back toward the table, clutching a handful of treasures. The family's silver SUV was parked about 20 feet away on the gravel parking area, designated for visitors to this remote section of Promised Land State Park. Megan's husband, David, was rummaging through the back of the vehicle, pulling out the large blue and white cooler they had packed that morning at their rental cabin about 40 minutes away. "Need any help with that?" Megan asked, watching as David, a broad-shouldered man with the build of someone who spent his weekends on home improvement projects, hoisted the cooler with a slight grunt. "I've got it," he replied, carrying it over to the picnic table. "Though I think we packed enough food for a week, not just a day hike." Megan smiled. "Better too much than too little, especially with those two," she said, nodding toward their children. Tyler complained he was starving not even an hour after breakfast. David set the cooler down on the end of the picnic table with a thud. "Growing boy," he said with a chuckle. "Speaking of which, I'm pretty hungry myself. How about we eat before we start the hike?" The Fosters had been planning this vacation for months, a week in the Pocono Mountains away from the suburban hustle of their home in Morristown, New Jersey. David worked long hours as an IT project manager, and Megan's teaching job, while offering summers off, kept her busy with grading papers and preparing lessons during the school year. This summer trip was meant to be a reconnection for all of them, a chance to escape screens and schedules and immerse themselves in nature. They had arrived at their rental cabin 2 days ago, a charming 2-bedroom structure nestled among tall pines with a small deck overlooking a stream. The weather had been perfect, warm August days with cool evenings, ideal for exploring the region's abundant natural attractions. Today, their 4th day of vacation, they had decided to visit Promised Land State Park, about 40 minutes from their cabin, to hike some of the trails that wound around Conservation Island. As Megan began unpacking their lunch, turkey sandwiches, pasta salad, fruit, chips, and homemade chocolate chip cookies, she took in the surrounding area. The picnic spot was in a small clearing about 50 yards from the main parking lot. A well-worn trail led from the clearing deeper into the forest, marked with a wooden sign indicating the start of the Conservation Island Loop Trail, their chosen. Picnic table was somewhat isolated from the park's more popular areas, offering a sense of privacy that Megan appreciated. Despite it being a Tuesday in mid-August, The park was relatively busy with families taking advantage of the remaining weeks of summer vacation. "Emma, Tyler, come wash your hands," Megan called, placing a small bottle of hand sanitizer on the table. The children reluctantly abandoned their exploration and trotted over. "Mom, I found a salamander," Tyler exclaimed, his eyes wide with excitement. It was orange with black spots. Emma tried to catch it, but it was too fast. "We should have brought a net," Emma added, squirting a dollop of sanitizer into her palm. "Then we could have caught it and put it in our nature book." "Just to look at it, right?" Megan asked, raising an eyebrow. "Remember what we talked about? We observe wildlife, but we don't take it home." "I know," Emma sighed, rubbing her hands together. "But it was so cool." David joined them at the table, having retrieved their backpack with water bottles and a first aid kit from the SUV. "All set for our hike after lunch. The trail guide says it's about 3 miles around Conservation Island, so not too challenging." "I can walk 3 miles easy," Tyler declared, climbing onto the bench beside his father. "I'm not even going to get tired." Megan smiled at her. Son's confidence as she distributed sandwiches wrapped in wax paper. "We'll see about that, buddy. We'll take it nice and slow, and there are lots of places to stop and rest along the way." The family settled into their meal, the conversation flowing easily as they discussed what they hoped to see on their hike. Emma was eager to spot more salamanders, and maybe a turtle or two, while Tyler was holding out hope for a bald eagle, having read in the park brochure that they sometimes nested in the area. David, an amateur photographer, had his camera ready to capture whatever wildlife they encountered, and Megan was simply looking forward to the peaceful walk through the woods, away from emails and lesson plans. As they ate, Megan couldn't help but notice how idyllic the moment felt. Her family together enjoying nature, the warm sunlight, the gentle rustle of leaves in the breeze. It was exactly the kind of experience she had hoped for when planning this vacation. Little did she know that their peaceful family outing was about to take a dramatic turn. They were just finishing their meal, with David gathering the empty wrappers and containers to dispose of properly. They had always been careful to teach the children about leaving no trace in nature, when Emma suddenly pointed toward the trees about 30 yards away. "Look," she whispered loudly, her eyes wide. "Is that a dog?" Megan turned to look in the direction her daughter was pointing, and her heart skipped a beat. Standing at the edge of the clearing, partially obscured by a large rhododendron bush, was not a dog, but a black bear. It was smaller than Megan had imagined a bear would be, perhaps a young adult, but still substantial with glossy black fur and a distinctive tan muzzle. The bear was on all fours, its head raised, nose working the air in their direction. "Nobody move," David said quietly, his voice calm but firm. "That's a black bear." Megan felt a cold wave of fear wash over her. Despite growing up in Pennsylvania and having visited the Poconos numerous times throughout her life, she had never encountered a bear in the wild. She had, of course, read the park brochures about black bears being common in the area, and had even discussed with David what to do if they saw one on a trail. But the reality of having one this close, with their children present, sent her maternal instincts into overdrive. "What's it doing?" Tyler whispered, scooting closer to Megan on the bench, his small hand finding hers and squeezing tightly. "It's just checking things out," David replied softly. "Remember what we read in the park guide? Black bears are usually just curious. If we don't bother it, it probably won't bother us." Megan nodded, trying to project a calm she didn't feel for the sake of the children. Her mind raced through the bear safety information she had read. "Don't run. Make yourself look bigger. Back away slowly. Don't turn your back." But with the picnic table between them and the SUV, any movement toward their vehicle would mean moving closer to the bear first. For a long moment, the bear remained at the edge of the clearing, seemingly assessing the situation. Its dark eyes, small and intelligent, scanned the picnic area. Then, to Megan's alarm, it took a few steps forward, emerging fully from the cover of the rhododendrons. "It's coming closer," Emma whispered, her voice tinged with fear as she pressed against David's side. "It's okay," David assured her, though Megan could see the tension in his shoulders. "We're going to slowly gather our things and move toward the car. No sudden movements. Stay together." As they began to carefully collect their belongings, Megan realized with a sinking heart what had likely attracted the bear. The cooler. Though they had packed away most of the food, the cooler was still on the table, and it likely retained the scent of their lunch. Black bears had an extraordinary sense of smell, capable of detecting food from over a mile away, a fact she remembered From a nature documentary she had shown her science class last year. "David," she whispered, nodding toward the cooler, "I think it smells the food." David followed her gaze and nodded in understanding. "Leave it," he said softly. "We'll get to the car. The cooler isn't worth the risk." With agonizing slowness, the family began to edge away from the picnic table toward the parking area where their SUV waited. Megan kept a firm grip on Tyler's hand, while David guided Emma with a hand on her shoulder. The bear, seemingly encouraged by their retreat, moved further into the clearing, its attention now clearly focused on the cooler. "That's it, David," murmured encouragingly, as they continued their careful withdrawal. Nice and slow. They had made it about halfway to the SUV when the bear reached the picnic table. With surprising dexterity for such a powerful animal, it rose up on its hind legs and placed its front paws on the table, nose investigating the cooler. Megan estimated it stood about 5 feet tall in this position. Not massive as bears go, but imposing nonetheless. "Keep moving," David whispered. "Almost there." But then Tyler, frightened by the bear's more aggressive investigation, stumbled slightly. The small noise he made as he caught himself seemed unnaturally loud in the tense silence, and the bear's head swiveled in their direction, eyes locking on the retreating family. For a heart-stopping moment, Megan thought the bear might charge. Instead, after a brief assessment, it returned its attention to the more interesting prospect of the cooler, dropping back to all fours and circling the picnic table. The family reached their SUV, and David quickly but quietly opened the rear passenger door. "Get in," he whispered, helping Emma inside first, then Tyler. Megan slipped into the back seat with the children while David made his way to the driver's side, keeping his eyes on the bear the entire time. Once inside the vehicle with the doors locked, Megan felt a small measure of relief wash over her. The children peered out the windows at the bear, fear giving way to cautious fascination now that they were safely inside the SUV. "What's it doing to our cooler?" Emma asked, watching as the bear investigated the blue and white container. "Trying to get to the food inside," David explained, his voice calmer now that they were in the relative safety of the vehicle. Bears have an amazing sense of smell. As they watched, the bear became more determined in its efforts, pushing at the cooler with its paws, tilting it off the edge of the table. The cooler fell to the ground with a loud clatter, causing the bear to jump back momentarily before cautiously approaching again. "Should we drive away?" Megan asked, still keeping her voice low despite being inside the vehicle. David shook his head. "I think we're fine here for now. I want to make sure it leaves the area before we start the engine, which might startle it. Besides," he added, reaching for his camera on the seat beside him, "this is actually an amazing opportunity to observe a bear in its natural habitat. As long as we stay in the car, we're safe." Megan wasn't entirely convinced that staying was the best option, but she had to admit that now that the immediate danger had passed, there was something fascinating about watching the wild animal. The bear was now working at the cooler's latches with its claws and teeth, displaying a level of dexterity and problem-solving ability that surprised her. "It's like it knows how to open it," Tyler said, his eyes wide with wonder. "Bears are very intelligent," Megan explained, slipping into teacher mode despite the unusual circumstances. "They learn quickly, especially when it comes to finding food." After several minutes of determined effort, the bear managed to pop one of the latches on the cooler. Encouraged by this success, it worked more intently on the second latch, eventually opening the cooler completely. Sandwich containers, fruit, and bags of chips spilled out onto the ground, and the bear began to inspect each item, sniffing and occasionally tasting. "There goes our hiking snacks," David remarked with a resigned sigh. "Better the snacks than us," Megan replied, only half joking. They continued to watch as the bear methodically went through their food, consuming some items and discarding others. It seemed particularly fond of the chocolate chip cookies, quickly devouring all of them. "Mom, it likes your cookies," Emma observed with a giggle, some of her fear having dissolved into amusement. "Everyone likes Mom's cookies," Tyler agreed. Despite the lightened mood inside the vehicle, Megan remained vigilant, acutely aware that they were essentially trapped until the bear decided to move on. She checked her watch. They had been in the SUV for nearly 30 minutes now, and the bear showed no signs of leaving, having discovered a veritable feast in their cooler. "Maybe we should try to scare it away," she suggested to David. "Honk the horn or something?" David considered this for a moment, Let's give it a little more time. Honking might startle it, but it could also aggravate it. The last thing we want is for it to feel threatened and start investigating the car more closely." Megan nodded, seeing his point. The bear had shown no interest in their vehicle so far, focused entirely on the food it had found. Provoking it unnecessarily seemed unwise. Another 15 minutes passed as the bear continued its leisurely exploration of their picnic remains. It had nearly finished going through everything when the sound of voices carried from the direction of the main parking lot. Other hikers, Megan presumed, heading toward the trail. "We should warn them," she said urgently, reaching for her door. "Handle." "Wait," David cautioned, placing a hand on her arm. "Don't open the door. I'll roll down the window and call out to them if they get closer." The bear, alerted by the new voices, raised its head and peered in the direction of the sound. After a moment of apparent deliberation, it began gathering some of the remaining food items, stuffing a package of lunch meat and a half-eaten bag of chips into its mouth before ambling toward the edge of the clearing. It paused once to look back at the cooler, perhaps considering whether to return for more. But the approaching voices seemed to convince it otherwise. With surprising swiftness for its bulky frame, the bear disappeared into the dense underbrush. "Is it gone?" Tyler asked, still peering out the window. "I think so," David replied, "but let's wait a bit longer to be sure." They sat in silence for another 5 minutes, watching the spot where the bear had vanished. When there was no further sign of it, and the voices of the approaching hikers grew louder, David finally started the engine. David drove back to their picnic site to assess the damage and retrieve what they could of their belongings. "Stay in the car," he instructed as he parked. "I'll check if the coast is clear and grab our stuff." Megan watched anxiously as David exited the vehicle and approached the picnic table, scanning the surrounding forest for any sign of the bear's return. The area was a mess, food containers scattered about, the contents of their cooler strewn across the ground, and the cooler itself lying on its side, one corner cracked from the bear's handling. After determining that the bear was truly gone, David signaled for them to join him. Megan hesitated, then decided it was safe enough. "Stay close to me," she told the children as they exited the SUV. "Wow, it really made a mess," Emma observed as they surveyed the damage. "Bears aren't known for their table manners," David joked, trying to lighten the mood as he began gathering their belongings. Megan helped collect the scattered items, salvaging what they could, and disposing of the rest in the nearby bear-proof trash receptacle. The children stayed close, still casting nervous glances toward the forest edge. "I think we should probably skip the hike today," Megan suggested, noting the lingering tension in Tyler's small shoulders. "Maybe we can come back another day or try a different trail." David agreed, and they finished cleaning up the site as best they could. The cooler, though damaged, was still functional enough to transport back to their cabin, and fortunately, their backpack with water bottles and the first aid kit had been in the car during the encounter. As they prepared to leave, a park ranger's vehicle pulled into the parking area. Apparently, the couple they had warned had reported the bear sighting. A ranger in the distinctive gray and green uniform approached them, clipboard in hand. "I understand you folks had a bear encounter," he said, introducing himself as Ranger Mike Peterson. David explained what had happened while Megan kept the children occupied, loading the last of their belongings into the SUV. The ranger took notes and asked several questions about the bear's size, behavior, and direction of travel. "Sounds like a young adult male, probably around 2 to 3 years old," Ranger Peterson observed. "We've had a few reports of a bear matching that description in this area over the past couple of weeks. He's been pretty bold about approaching picnic areas, but hasn't shown any aggressive behavior toward people so far." "Is that normal?" Megan asked, joining the conversation. "It seemed very comfortable around humans." The ranger nodded. "Unfortunately, it's becoming more common. When bears associate people with food, whether from picnics, unsecured trash, or intentional feeding, they lose their natural wariness. This one has probably had success finding food at human sites before." "Should you trap it or relocate it?" David asked, snapping the damaged cooler shut and hefting it toward their vehicle. Ranger Peterson shook his head. "We try to avoid relocating bears unless they're exhibiting truly dangerous behavior. Relocation is stressful for the animals and not always successful long-term. Our primary approach is education, teaching visitors proper food storage and disposal and how to react in bear encounters." He handed them a pamphlet titled "Living with Black Bears," and thanked them for reporting the incident. "You folks did everything right," he added. "You stayed calm, gave the bear space, and retreated to your vehicle. A lot of people panic, or worse, try to get closer for photos." After providing their contact information for the ranger's report, the Foster family climbed back into their SUV, ready to leave the excitement behind. As David drove out of the park, Megan noticed the children were unusually quiet, processing the unexpected adventure. "Are you two okay?" she asked, turning in her seat to look at them. Emma nodded. "It was scary, but kind of cool too. Wait until I tell Madison and Zoe that I saw a real bear." Tyler was more subdued. "I didn't like it," he admitted quietly. "It was big and it ate all our cookies." Megan reached back to squeeze his knee reassuringly. "That's okay, honey. It was a little scary for me too, but we're all safe. And now, we have quite a story to tell, don't we?" As they made their way back to their rental cabin, the conversation gradually shifted to what they might do with the remainder of their day. Perhaps visit the nearby town of Hawley for ice cream, or spend some time at the cabin reading and playing board games. The bear encounter, while momentarily frightening, had already begun to transform into a family story, one they would likely recount for years to come. What none of them realized as they drove away from Promised Land State Park was that their encounter with the black bear was not entirely over. The young male bear, having enjoyed a substantial meal from their cooler, had merely retreated deeper into the forest when the humans' voices grew too numerous for comfort. It had not traveled far, however. With its extraordinary sense of smell, it had already registered and memorized a particularly appealing scent from the human belongings, one it would recognize again if the opportunity presented itself. Back at their rental cabin, the Fosters tried to salvage what remained of their day. David suggested driving into Hawley, the nearest sizable town, for a late lunch, and perhaps some exploring to make up for their abbreviated time at the state park. The children quickly warmed to this idea, especially when ice cream was mentioned, as a potential dessert. "I need to change first," Emma declared, looking down at her dirt-smudged shorts from their earlier adventure. "And I want to write about the bear in my vacation journal before I forget anything." Tyler nodded in agreement. "Me too. I'm going to draw a picture of it eating Mom's cookies." Megan smiled at their resilience. "Go ahead, but don't take too long. We'll leave in about 30 minutes. As the children disappeared into their shared bedroom, Megan joined David on the cabin's small deck, where he was inspecting their damaged cooler more thoroughly in the afternoon sunlight. "Think it can be saved?" she asked, leaning against the wooden railing. David turned the cooler over in his hands, examining the cracked corner and the broken latch. "Probably not worth repairing. The corner's split pretty badly, and it would leak if we put ice in." "Dead now," he set it aside with a shrug. "Small price to pay, all things considered." Megan nodded, gazing out at the stream that ran behind their cabin. The water sparkled in the dappled sunlight filtering through the trees, creating a scene of tranquil beauty that stood in stark contrast to the adrenaline-fueled encounter they'd experienced earlier. "It's strange," she said after a moment. "I've always thought of bears as these fearsome predators, but watching it today, it just seemed like a hungry animal looking for an easy meal." "That's exactly what it was," David agreed. "The ranger mentioned it was probably a young male. They have to establish their own territories once they leave their mothers, and human areas often have accessible food sources." Megan considered this. Still, it was unsettling how bold it was. "I mean, it walked right up to our picnic table while we were still there." David nodded. "That's what concerns the Park Service too. A bear that comfortable around humans is at greater risk of eventual conflict, even if it's not aggressive, just curious or food-motivated. It only takes one misunderstanding or one person reacting badly to create a dangerous situation." They fell silent for a moment, each contemplating the encounter from a slightly different perspective. For Megan, it had triggered an instinctive maternal protectiveness that still had her feeling somewhat shaken, while David seemed to view it more as an unexpected wildlife experience, concerning in the moment, but fascinating in retrospect. "Do you think we should cut the trip short?" Megan asked, finally voicing a thought that had been nagging at her. "Head back to Morristown early?" David looked surprised. "Because of the bear? I don't think that's necessary. We were unlucky today, but the odds of another encounter are pretty slim, especially if we're careful about food storage and stick to more populated areas." Megan wasn't entirely convinced, but nodded anyway. They had been planning this vacation for months, and one unsettling incident didn't warrant abandoning it altogether, especially when the children already seemed to be bouncing back from the experience. "You're right," she conceded, "and the kids would be disappointed. Maybe we should just avoid the remote picnic areas for the rest of the trip." "Agreed," David said, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "Rest-stop picnics from now on, where the biggest wildlife threat is overly aggressive squirrels." Megan laughed, feeling some of the tension ease from her shoulders. "Deal." Inside the cabin, Emma and Tyler were diligently recording their bear encounter in their vacation journals, a tradition Megan had started on their first family trip 3 years ago. Emma, the more detail-oriented of the two, was writing a meticulous account of the events, while Tyler was focused on creating an elaborate drawing of the bear investigating their cooler, his tongue caught between his teeth in concentration. "Mom, how tall do you think the bear was?" Emma called as Megan entered the cabin. "I want to get it right in my journal." "When it stood up on its hind legs, maybe 5 feet, Megan estimated, recalling the image of the bear rising to investigate the cooler. The ranger thought it was a young adult male, so not fully grown. "That's taller than you, Tyler," Emma informed her brother with a touch of older sibling superiority. "Nah-uh," Tyler protested. "I'm at least 10 feet tall." Megan smiled at the exchange, glad to see the children processing the experience through their usual sibling banter, rather than dwelling on any fear. "Are you two almost ready to go? Dad's waiting outside." With promises to finish their journal entries later, the children gathered their things and the family set out for Hawley. The drive took them through winding mountain roads, the dense forest occasionally giving way to breathtaking vistas of the surrounding Pocono Mountains. Megan found herself relaxing as they put distance between themselves and the state park, the beautiful scenery helping to reset the day's tone. Hawley proved to be a charming town with a historic downtown area featuring a mix of local shops, restaurants, and galleries. They found a casual cafe with outdoor seating along the Lackawaxen River and enjoyed a late lunch, followed by the promised ice cream at a nearby parlor that offered more flavors than Tyler could count. "I like vacation ice cream better than regular ice cream," he declared, his face adorned with chocolate smudges. "It's the same ice cream, buddy," David pointed out with a chuckle. "It just tastes better because you're on vacation." The afternoon in Hawley helped salvage the day, and by the time they returned to their cabin in the early evening, the bear encounter had been relegated to just one event in a day filled with experiences. After dinner, prepared safely inside the cabin's small kitchen, they spent the evening playing board games and planning the following day's activities, deciding on a visit to Bushkill Falls, advertised as the Niagara of Pennsylvania. As night fell and the children were tucked into bed, Megan found herself standing on the deck again, listening to the chorus of cicadas and frogs that filled the darkness. David joined her, handing her a glass of wine. "Penny for your thoughts," he said, leaning against the railing beside her. Megan sipped the wine, a local Chamboussin from a winery they had passed on their drive to the cabin. "Just thinking about today. How quickly things can change, you know? One minute we're having this perfect family picnic and the next, nature reminds us who's really in charge," David finished for her. "Exactly." She gazed up at the stars, brilliantly visible here away from city lights. "It makes you realize how insulated we usually are from the wild, even though it's all around us." David nodded. "That's part of why I wanted to bring the kids here, so they could experience something beyond suburban playgrounds and shopping malls, though I wasn't planning on quite such an intense nature lesson." They shared a quiet laugh, and Megan felt the last of her unease from earlier dissipating. The encounter had been frightening, yes, but also a powerful reminder of the world beyond, their everyday experiences, a world they had specifically sought out by coming to the Poconos. "I'm glad we're staying," she said finally. "You were right. One bear shouldn't ruin our vacation." They finished their wine and headed inside, unaware that approximately 20 miles away, the same bear that had investigated their cooler was now exploring the perimeter of another campsite, drawn by the lingering sense of a barbecue dinner. This time, however, the campers had properly stored their food in provided bear lockers, leaving the animal with nothing but tantalizing aromas. After several frustrated attempts to locate the source of the smells, it moved on, continuing its nightly search for an easy meal. The next morning dawned clear and warm, promising another beautiful summer day in the Poconos. The Foster family enjoyed a leisurely breakfast on their cabin's deck, watching hummingbirds flit around a feeder hung by previous guests. Their plan for the day was to visit Bushkill Falls, a series of 8 waterfalls nestled in a forested gorge about 30 minutes from their cabin. "Are there bears at the waterfall?" Tyler asked as he munched on a piece of toast slathered with raspberry jam. "Probably not where all the people are," David assured him. "Bears usually prefer to avoid crowds." "Usually," Emma emphasized, giving her brother a meaningful look that made him shift nervously in his seat. "Emma, don't tease your brother," Megan admonished gently. "The trails at Bushkill Falls are very popular and well-maintained. We'll be with lots of other visitors." This seemed to reassure Tyler, and they finished breakfast without further bear discussions. After cleaning up and packing a small backpack, with water bottles, snacks, stored in resealable plastic bags rather than their damaged cooler, and a first aid kit, they set out for Bushkill Falls. The drive took them through more of the region's scenic beauty, winding roads framed by dense forests with occasional glimpses of distant mountains. Megan found herself scanning the tree line more attentively than she might have before yesterday's encounter, a new awareness of the forest's hidden inhabitants sharpening her perception. Bushkill Falls was already busy when they arrived around mid-morning, the parking lot filling up with vehicles bearing license plates from Pennsylvania, New Jersey, New York, and beyond. The site was a popular tourist attraction, featuring wooden walkways and stairs that provided access to views of the various waterfalls while protecting the surrounding ecosystem. "It's like a natural water park," Tyler exclaimed as they approached, the entrance after paying the admission fee. "Except you can't go in the water," Emma corrected, having already read the rules posted at the entrance. "It says no swimming allowed." "That's right," Megan confirmed. "We're here to look, not swim. The currents around waterfalls can be very dangerous." They joined the stream of visitors making their way along the wooden walkways, stopping frequently to admire the falls and take photos. David, with his camera slung around his neck, was in his element, carefully composing shots of the cascading water and the family posed against the scenic backdrop. The main falls dropped around 100 feet into a rocky gorge, the water churning and misting as it crashed down. The children were suitably impressed, their eyes wide as they peered through the safety railings at the powerful display of nature. "It's so loud!" Tyler shouted over the roar of the water, his hands covering his ears. "That's the sound of thousands of gallons of water falling every minute," Megan explained, raising her voice to be heard. "All that energy creates sound waves that we hear as roaring." They continued along the trails, completing the 2-mile loop that showcased all 8 of the falls. By the time they finished, it was early afternoon, and the children were hungry, again despite the snacks they had consumed along the way. "There's a picnic area near the parking lot," David suggested, consulting a map of the grounds. "We could have lunch there before heading back." Megan hesitated, memories of yesterday's interrupted picnic still fresh in her mind. "Maybe we should find a restaurant instead. There must be something nearby." David gave her a knowing look, but didn't push the issue. "Whatever you're comfortable with. I think there are a few places in the village we passed about 5 miles back." They decided on a small family restaurant in the nearby village of Bushkill, where they enjoyed a hearty lunch of burgers and sandwiches. The establishment was clearly accustomed to serving tourists from the falls, with nature-themed decor and menu items named after local landmarks. As they ate, the conversation naturally turned to what they had seen that morning. "My favorite was the Bridal Veil Falls," Emma declared. "It looked like lace flowing down the rocks." "I liked the big one best," Tyler countered. "The one that made all the mist and rainbows." "That's the main falls," David said. "And I agree, it was pretty impressive." "What did you like best, Mom?" Emma asked, turning to Megan. Megan considered the question. "I enjoyed the quiet pools between the falls, actually. They looked so peaceful, these little moments of calm between all that rushing energy." David smiled at her response. "Always finding the contemplative angle," he teased gently. "That's why you're the one teaching the kids about science and nature, not me." After lunch, they decided to take a scenic drive through Delaware Water Gap National Recreation Area before returning to their cabin. The afternoon passed pleasantly as they explored some of the overlooks and short trails accessible from the road, being careful to stay in well-populated areas as a concession to Megan's lingering concerns about wildlife encounters. By the time they returned to their cabin in the early evening, everyone was pleasantly tired from a full day of exploration. The children retreated to their room to update their vacation journals, while David and Megan sat on the deck, enjoying the lengthening shadows of late afternoon and discussing plans for dinner. "We could grill those steaks we bought yesterday," David suggested. "There's a charcoal grill beside the cabin." Megan frowned slightly. "Is that a good idea? Wouldn't the smell attract—" "You know," David considered this. "The grill is pretty close to the cabin, and we'd be right here the whole time. Plus, we're in a more developed area than the state park was. There are cabins all around us." Megan wasn't entirely convinced, but decided not to let yesterday's incident dictate every decision for the remainder of their vacation. "Okay, but let's make sure we clean everything up thoroughly afterward." They prepared a meal of grilled steaks, corn on the cob, and salad, cooking and eating on the deck as the sunset painted the sky in vibrant oranges and pinks. The food was delicious, the setting idyllic, and Megan found herself fully relaxing for the first time since the bear encounter. After dinner, David diligently cleaned the grill and disposed of all food scraps in the cabin's trash can, which they kept securely inside. They spent the evening playing cards with the children and planning their activities for the next day, their last full day in the Poconos before returning to New Jersey. "Can we go canoeing?" Emma asked hopefully. "The brochure said there's a place that rents canoes on Lake Wallenpaupack." "That sounds fun," David agreed, looking to Megan for confirmation. "Sure," she nodded. "We've never taken the kids canoeing before. It would be something new." With their plans set, they eventually herded the children off to bed. Despite protests that vacation bedtimes should be later than normal ones, Megan and David followed not long after, tired from their active day. As they settled into bed, David propped himself up on one elbow, studying Megan's face in the dim light filtering through the curtains. "You seem more relaxed today," she smiled, reaching up to touch his cheek. "I am. I decided not to let one incident spoil the whole trip. The kids are having a great time, and so am I." "Good," he said, leaning down to kiss her forehead. "That's what vacations are for, making memories, not worries." They fell asleep with the windows cracked open, the cool mountain air filling the room with the scent of pine and the gentle soundtrack of cicadas and distant owls. Outside in the surrounding forest, nocturnal creatures went about their business, including a certain black bear that was currently several miles away, investigating a campground dumpster that had been improperly secured. The next morning, their fifth day in the Poconos and their last full day before returning home, dawned slightly overcast with a hint of humidity that suggested afternoon thunderstorms might be possible. After checking the weather forecast on his phone, David assured everyone that any rain would likely hold off until evening, leaving them plenty of time for their planned canoeing excursion on Lake Wallenpaupack. They ate breakfast, packed a lunch, again using resealable bags rather than a cooler, and set out for the lake, which was about a 40-minute drive from their cabin. Lake Wallenpaupack was one of the largest lakes in Pennsylvania, created in the 1920s by the damming of Wallenpaupack Creek. With 52 miles of shoreline, it was a popular destination for boating, fishing, and other water activities. The family arrived at a boat rental facility on the eastern shore of the lake around 10 a.m. The business offered a variety of watercraft, motorboats, pontoon boats, kayaks, and canoes. After signing the necessary waivers and receiving brief instructions, they were fitted with life jackets and led to a red canoe waiting at the dock. "Have any of you canoed before?" asked the young man assisting them, who introduced himself as Jake. "I have, but it's been years," David replied, "and it's the first time for my wife and kids." Jake nodded, proceeding to give them a thorough overview of canoe basics, how to hold the paddle, basic strokes for steering, and safety guidelines. He helped them all into the canoe, positioning David at the stern, rear, where he could steer, Megan at the bow, front, and the children in the middle. "Remember, stay seated at all times," Jake emphasized, directing this primarily to the children. "And keep your life jackets on the entire time you're on the water." With final instructions to return within 4 hours, Jake pushed their canoe away from the dock, and they were off, gliding across the calm surface of the lake. It took a few minutes for everyone to find their rhythm with the paddles, resulting in some initial zigzagging and laughter, but soon they were moving smoothly through the water. "This is awesome," Emma declared, trailing her fingers in the cool lake water beside the canoe. "Look how far you can see," Tyler added, pointing across the expansive lake to distant shores lined with trees and occasional houses. Megan had to agree that the view was spectacular. Despite the overcast sky, The lake stretched out before them like a vast mirror, reflecting the surrounding forested hills and the diffused light from above. She found the repetitive motion of paddling oddly meditative, allowing her mind to clear of the lingering concerns from their bear encounter 2 days prior. They spent the next couple of hours exploring a small portion of the enormous lake, staying relatively close to shore as recommended for novice canoeists. They passed several small uninhabited islands, observed fishermen in boats patiently waiting for catches, and waved to other canoes and kayaks they encountered. Around noon, they found a small pebbly beach on the shoreline designated as a public access area, where they pulled the canoe up and secured it for a lunch break. The spot was perfect, a flat area with a few scattered picnic tables and a stunning view of the lake. "I could get used to this," David said, stretching his arms above his head after the unaccustomed workout of paddling. "Maybe we should look into getting a canoe for that lake near your parents' place." "That would be fun for summer visits," Megan agreed, unpacking their lunch on one of the picnic tables. The children were already exploring the shoreline, searching for interesting rocks and shells, their earlier enthusiasm for canoeing temporarily forgotten in favor of this new adventure. As they ate their sandwiches, Megan found herself scanning their surroundings with the heightened awareness she had developed since the bear encounter. This area was much more open than the forest setting where they had met the bear, with fewer places for a large animal to hide, but the habit of vigilance had already become ingrained. "What time do we need to have the canoe back?" she asked, checking her watch. "Jake said 4 hours, so around 2 p.m., David replied, following her gaze as she surveyed the tree line behind their picnic spot. "Everything okay?" Megan nodded, offering a slightly embarrassed smile. "Just being cautious. Old habits die hard, I guess." David reached across the table to squeeze her hand reassuringly. "We're fine here. Lots of open space, other people nearby." He nodded toward another family that had pulled their kayaks up about 50 yards down the beach. "I know," Megan acknowledged. "It's silly." "Not silly," David corrected gently. "Natural. We had a scare, and your brain is just trying to keep us safe. That's how humans have survived all these years, by remembering dangers and being alert for them." Megan appreciated his understanding. David had always been good at balancing her occasional tendency to worry with his more laid-back approach, without dismissing her concerns entirely. After lunch, they cleaned up thoroughly, making sure to leave no food scraps behind, and returned to their canoe for more exploration. The children, initially hesitant about getting back on the water after enjoying the freedom of the shoreline, were quickly re-engaged when David suggested they look for turtles sunning themselves on logs near the shore. "The first one to spot a turtle gets to pick the movie for our next family movie night," he proposed, knowing both children were eager to see the latest animated release that had just come out. This incentivized even Tyler, who had been the most reluctant to leave the beach, and soon they were paddling along the shoreline, eyes peeled for the distinctive shapes of turtles on partially submerged logs or rocks. "There's one," Emma shouted after about 15 minutes of searching, pointing excitedly toward a fallen tree, extending into the water from the shore. Sure enough, 3 small turtles were perched on the log, their shells glistening in the occasional breaks of sunlight through the clouds. Eastern painted turtles, Megan identified, recognizing the distinctive yellow and red markings on their dark shells. "Good spot, Emma." Emma beamed with pride, already announcing which movie she would choose for their next movie night, while Tyler continued to scan the shoreline determinedly, hoping to at least find the second turtle of the day. They continued their peaceful exploration for another hour, spotting several more turtles, a great blue heron fishing in the shallows, and countless small fish darting beneath their canoe in the clear water. By the time they needed to head back to return the canoe, even Megan had completely relaxed, the rhythmic paddling and beautiful surroundings washing away the last of her tension from the bear incident. They returned the canoe right on schedule, tired but happy from their adventure on the lake. The children chatted excitedly about everything they had seen, particularly the wildlife, as they climbed back into the SUV for the drive back to their cabin. "Can we do this again tomorrow before we leave?" Tyler asked hopefully. "Sorry, buddy. We need to check out of the cabin by 11 a.m. tomorrow," David reminded him. "But we can definitely do it again next time we visit the Poconos." The mention of their impending departure brought a momentary pang of regret for Megan. Despite the bear encounter, the vacation had been exactly what they needed: time together, as a family, away from the distractions and routines of everyday life. She wasn't quite ready for it to end. "Maybe we can stop somewhere fun on the drive home tomorrow," she suggested, wanting to extend the vacation feeling just a bit longer. "There's that aviation museum near Allentown that Tyler's been wanting to visit." "Yes," Tyler exclaimed from the back seat, his disappointment about leaving instantly transformed into excitement about the new plan. As they drove back to the cabin, the sky began to darken with approaching thunderclouds, confirming David's prediction about afternoon storms. They arrived just as the first heavy raindrops began to fall, dashing from the SUV to the cabin's covered porch as thunder rumbled in the distance. "Perfect timing," David remarked as they entered the cabin, the rain now falling steadily outside. "How about we start packing up some of our stuff while we wait out the storm? Then we can have one last dinner here tonight." The family spent the next couple of hours organizing their belongings and packing what they wouldn't need for their final night and morning at the cabin. The children were assigned the task of collecting all their books, games, and toys, which had somehow migrated to every corner of the small cabin over the course of their stay. Outside, the storm intensified, with heavy rain drumming on the cabin's roof and occasional flashes of lightning, followed by resounding thunder. It created a cozy atmosphere inside as they worked, and by the time they had finished most of the packing, the storm was beginning to move on, leaving a steady but gentler rain in its wake. "The rain might actually cool things down a bit," David observed, checking the weather on his phone again. "It's been so humid today." For dinner, they decided to use up the remaining groceries they had purchased earlier in the week. A simple meal of pasta with sauce from a jar, garlic bread, and a salad. As they ate at the small dining table inside the cabin, with the gentle rain providing a soothing backdrop, they reflected on their vacation highlights. "What was everyone's favorite part of the trip?" Megan asked, pouring a small glass of wine for herself and David. "Canoeing," Emma declared without hesitation. "I loved seeing all the turtles and fish, and I was really good at paddling." "You were," David agreed, "a natural canoeist." "I liked Bushkill Falls," Tyler said after a moment of consideration. "All that water was so powerful, and I liked the ice cream in that town afterward." "What about you, Dad?" Megan prompted. David thought for a moment. "I'd have to say our bear encounter, actually," he said, earning a surprised look from Megan. "Not because it was fun at the time, but because it was so real. It's one thing to see a bear in a zoo or on TV, but to experience one in its natural habitat, behaving naturally, that's something most people never get to do." Megan could understand his perspective, even if she didn't entirely share it. "I guess I can see that. It certainly made an impression." "What about you, Mom?" Emma asked. "What was your favorite?" Megan considered the question, thinking back over the past 5 days. "I think this," she said finally, gesturing to the table where they sat together. "Not just dinner, but all the moments like this. The 4 of us together, talking, laughing, sharing experiences. That's what I'll remember most." Her answer earned a theatrical eye roll from Emma, who at 8 was already developing a preteen sense of her mother's sentimentality. But David smiled warmly across the table, understanding exactly what she meant. After dinner, they played one last game of Uno, which had become their go-to evening entertainment during the vacation. Tyler, usually the first to lose interest in card games, won 2 rounds in a row, declaring himself the Uno champion of the Poconos, with his arms raised victoriously. As bedtime approached, the rain finally stopped entirely, leaving behind a fresh, clean scent that permeated the cabin when Megan opened a window slightly. The children, tired from their day on the lake, went to bed without the usual protests, excited about the aviation museum visit planned for the following day. Once they were settled, Megan and David stepped out onto the deck, one last time, wanting to savor the final evening of their vacation. The air was noticeably cooler after the storm, with a pleasant breeze that carried the scent of wet earth and pine. The nearly full moon occasionally peeked through breaks in the dissipating clouds, casting silver light across the wet deck and surrounding trees. "I'm glad we did this," Megan said softly, leaning against the railing beside David. "Even with the bear drama." "Especially with the bear drama," David countered with a smile. "It's the unexpected moments that make the best stories, right?" Megan had to agree. "The kids will be telling that story for years. Did you see Tyler's drawing in his journal? That bear was at least 12 feet tall and had enormous teeth." They shared a quiet laugh, and David wrapped an arm around her shoulders, pulling her close against the cool night air. "Next year, maybe the beach? Fewer bears, though the sharks might be an issue. Very funny, Megan replied, elbowing him gently. Actually, I wouldn't mind coming back here. The Poconos are beautiful, and there's so much we didn't get to see. Really? David sounded slightly surprised. Even after the bear? Megan nodded. One bear shouldn't define an entire region. Besides, now we know better about picnicking in remote areas. They stayed outside a while longer, listening to the nighttime sounds of the forest and discussing possibilities for next year's vacation. Finally, as the temperature continued to drop and yawns became more frequent, they headed inside to get some rest before their final morning and the drive home. Neither of them noticed the dark shape moving at the edge of the clearing behind their cabin, a large black bear, drawn by the lingering scents from their dinner and the garbage can at the side of the cabin, which contained their food waste from the past several days. The bear, the same young male they had encountered at Promised Land State Park, had followed a complex trail of scents through the forest, his extraordinary sense of smell allowing him to detect the familiar human odors from a considerable distance. Now, with the humans inside and the night providing cover, the bear approached the cabin cautiously, nose working constantly to assess potential threats and food opportunities. The garbage can was his first target, secured with a simple latch that posed little challenge to his dexterous paws. Inside the cabin, Megan and David had gone to bed, the windows still cracked open slightly to allow the cool night air to circulate. They had left some of their bags packed and ready by the front door for an efficient departure in the morning, including Megan's large tote bag containing snacks for the journey home, granola bars, apple slices in containers, and, fatefully, the remains of the chocolate chip cookies that had so interested the bear during their previous encounter. The sound of something knocking over the garbage can outside was what first alerted Megan, pulling her from the edge of sleep. She lay still for a moment, listening, wondering if she had dreamed the noise or if perhaps a raccoon was investigating their trash. "David," she whispered, reaching over to shake her husband's shoulder gently. "I think there's something outside." David mumbled something unintelligible, still mostly asleep. The sound came again, a distinct clatter followed by what Megan could only describe as forceful snuffling. Her heart rate quickened as she sat up, straining to see through the bedroom window, which offered a partial view of the side of the cabin where the garbage can was located. "David," she tried again, more urgently this time. "Wake up. There's definitely something outside." This time David stirred properly, pushing himself up on his elbows. "What's happening?" he asked, his voice thick with sleep. "Listen," Megan instructed, and they both fell silent, ears attuned to the sounds outside. The clatter came again, followed by a low grunt that was distinctly not raccoon-like. David was fully alert now, swinging his legs over the side of the bed and reaching for his phone on the nightstand. "That sounds big," he said, activating the phone's flashlight function. "Stay here. I'll check it out." "Be careful," Megan urged, already suspecting what, or rather who, their nocturnal visitor might be. David moved quietly through the cabin, pausing at the front window that looked out toward the side of the cabin. Megan followed despite his instruction to stay put, unwilling to let him investigate alone. Using his phone's flashlight to illuminate the area outside the window, David swept the beam across the side of the cabin. The garbage can had been knocked over, its contents strewn across the ground, and standing amid the mess, illuminated in the harsh white light, was the unmistakable form of a black bear. "It's back," Megan whispered, a cold wave of fear washing over her as she recognized the bear from their picnic encounter. Though she couldn't be absolutely certain it was the same individual, the size and distinctive tan muzzle strongly suggested it was their visitor from Promised Land State Park. The bear, startled by the sudden light, raised its head, dark eyes reflecting the beam eerily. For a moment, it seemed to look directly at them through the window, and Megan instinctively took a step back, tugging at David's arm. "What do we do?" she asked, keeping her voice low. "Call the ranger station," David suggested, still watching. The bear, which had returned its attention to something particularly interesting in the scattered trash. "There should be a number in that pamphlet they gave us." Megan hurried to retrieve the Living with Black Bears pamphlet from her purse, hands trembling slightly as she flipped through it to find the emergency contact information. She was about to dial when a sudden crash from the front of the cabin made them both jump. "What was that?" she gasped, phone still in hand. David was already moving toward the sound, and Megan followed, heart pounding. They reached the small entryway of the cabin to find the screen door pushed open, the flimsy hook and eye latch that had secured it, now bent and useless. Just outside on the porch, illuminated by the porch light they had left on, the bear was investigating their packed bags, having apparently lost interest in the garbage when it detected the more appealing scent of food in Megan's tote. "Hey!" David shouted instinctively, then immediately regretted it as the bear's head snapped up, eyes fixing on them standing in the doorway. "The inner door," Megan urged, pulling at his arm. "Close the solid door." They retreated a step, and David quickly pushed the wooden inner door closed, turning the deadbolt with a decisive click. Through the door's small window, they could still see the bear on the porch now ripping into Megan's tote bag with determined claws, easily accessing the snacks stored inside. The kids, Megan suddenly remembered, turning toward the hallway. That led to the children's bedroom. "What if they wake up and come out here?" "I'll check on them," David assured her. "You call the ranger station." As David hurried to the children's room, Megan dialed the emergency number listed in the pamphlet. It rang several times before being answered by a dispatch operator who identified themselves as being with the Pennsylvania Game Commission. "We have a bear on our cabin porch," Megan explained, trying to keep her voice steady. "It's gotten into our trash and now it's going through our bags on the porch. We're at Silver Pine Cabins, Cabin 7, just off Route 507. The operator took the information calmly, asking several questions about the bear's size and behavior, whether anyone was injured, and if they were all safely inside. Megan answered as best she could, watching through the door's window as the bear continued to methodically explore their belongings, having now moved on from the tote bag to David's duffel. "Wildlife Conservation Officer will be dispatched to your location," the operator informed her. "It may take about 30-45 minutes for them to arrive. In the meantime, stay inside, keep all doors and windows securely closed, and don't attempt to scare the bear away on your own. If the bear tries to enter the cabin, move to a secure room and call 911 immediately." Megan thanked the operator and ended the call, turning to find David returning from checking on the children. "They're still asleep," he reported, keeping his voice low. "What did the ranger say?" "It wasn't a ranger, it was someone from the Game Commission," Megan corrected. "They're sending someone out, but it could be up to 45 minutes. David frowned, glancing at his watch. "It's past midnight. What are we supposed to do until then?" A loud thump from the porch provided an immediate answer to his question. The bear had knocked over one of their larger suitcases and was now pawing at the zipper with surprising dexterity. "We wait," Megan said simply, moving away from the door. "And we make sure all the other doors and windows are secured." They did a quick check of the cabin, closing and locking all windows that had been left cracked open for ventilation. The cabin wasn't large, just a main living area with a small kitchen, a master bedroom, a second bedroom where the children slept, and a bathroom. The only doors to the outside were the front door, which the bear was currently investigating beyond, and a back door off the kitchen that led to the deck. Having secured the cabin as best they could, they returned to the front room, keeping a watchful eye on their unwanted visitor through the door's window, the UA. Bear seemed content for now to explore the bags on the porch, occasionally finding edible treasures that it consumed with obvious enjoyment. "I can't believe it followed us," Megan said, shaking her head in disbelief. "What are the odds?" "It probably didn't follow us specifically," David reasoned, though he looked equally concerned. "Bears have huge territories, and it's likely just a coincidence that it ended up here. Or maybe this area is part of its regular foraging route." "Still," Megan persisted, "it's the same bear, I'm sure of it. The same size, the same coloring. It even has that lighter patch on its muzzle." David didn't argue the point. Whether it was truly the same individual or not was less important than their current predicament, being essentially trapped in their cabin while a bear ransacked their belongings outside. "Should we wake the kids?" Megan asked after a few minutes of tense silence. "In case we need to move quickly." David considered this. "Let's let them sleep for now. They're safe in their room, and there's no immediate danger as long as we stay inside. No sense frightening them unnecessarily." Megan nodded in agreement, though she couldn't help but imagine scenarios where they might need to evacuate quickly. What if the bear somehow broke through a window? What if it found a way into the cabin? Through some entrance they hadn't considered. Her mind raced with possibilities, each more concerning than the last. As if sensing her spiraling thoughts, David placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We're going to be fine," he said firmly. "The bear is only interested in food, not us. Once it's done with our bags, it will probably move on." His words were reasonable, but Megan found little comfort in them as she watched the bear tear open a package of trail mix from David's duffel, scattering nuts and dried fruit across the porch as it eagerly consumed the calorie-rich find. The next 30 minutes passed with agonizing slowness as they took turns watching the bear's activities and checking on the still sleeping children. The bear showed no signs of losing interest in their belongings, having discovered that these strange containers held numerous edible treasures. It had worked its way through most of their packed bags and was now investigating a small cooler bag that contained drinks and perishable snacks for their journey home. Finally, the sound of a vehicle approaching broke the tense silence. Headlights swept across the front of the cabin as a truck pulled up, the emblem of the Pennsylvania Game Commission visible on its door as it came to a stop. The bear, instantly alert to the new arrival, paused in its exploration of the cooler bag, head raised and ears forward. As the truck's door opened and a uniformed officer stepped out, the bear made a quick decision, abandoning its feast and lumbering off the porch. It disappeared into the darkness of the surrounding forest with surprising speed for such a large animal. "Perfect timing," David remarked with palpable relief, already moving to open the inner door as the officer approached, flashlight in hand. The wildlife conservation officer introduced himself as Officer Martinez, a middle-aged man with a weathered face that suggested years of outdoor work. He surveyed the mess on the porch with a practiced eye, then asked them to recount exactly what had happened. Megan and David took turns explaining the evening's events, as well as their previous encounter with what they believed to be the same bear at Promised Land State Park. Officer Martinez listened attentively, occasionally asking clarifying questions or making notes in a small notebook. "Based on your description, it sounds like a young adult male black bear, probably around 3 years old," he said when they had finished. "At that age, they're establishing their territories and learning where to find food. Unfortunately, once they discover that human areas can provide easy meals, they often become what we call problem bears." "Teos, is it dangerous?" Megan asked, thinking of her children sleeping just down the hall. Officer Martinez considered the question carefully. "Black bears aren't naturally aggressive toward humans," he explained. "They're primarily interested in food, not confrontation. That said, any wild animal can be unpredictable, especially one that's lost its natural wariness of humans." He surveyed the damage to their belongings again. "This bear is showing increasingly bold behavior, approaching an occupied dwelling, breaking through a screen door. That's concerning." "What happens now?" David asked. "Will you try to catch it?" "I'll file a report and we'll increase patrols in this area," the officer replied. "If it continues to show this level of habituation and food conditioning, we might eventually have to trap and relocate it, but that's a last resort." He helped them gather their scattered belongings, advising them to place anything with food residue in the cabin's outdoor trash can, which he secured with a bungee cord from his truck, a temporary measure to get through the night. "For tonight, keep everything closed up tight," he instructed. "The bear might return if it thinks there's still food available. I'll do a sweep of the area before I leave, but these bears can be pretty persistent once they've found a food source." Officer Martinez provided them with a copy of his report for their records and left them with additional informational materials about bear encounters. He also suggested they might want to inform the cabin rental company about the incident in the morning. "Thank you for coming out so late," Megan said as he prepared to leave. "All part of the job," he replied with a good-natured shrug. "Living with wildlife means occasional midnight calls." After the officer departed, Megan and David surveyed the damage to their belongings. Most of the food items had been consumed or scattered, and several bags were torn where the bear had forced its way into them. David's duffel had a large rip along one side, and Megan's tote was beyond salvation, the fabric shredded by powerful claws. "Well, I guess we know what we'll be doing first thing tomorrow," David said, attempting to lighten the mood as they gathered the remains of their belongings. "Shopping for new luggage." Megan managed a small smile, though the encounter had left her shaken. At least the kids slept through it all. Small mercies. They did their best to secure the damaged screen door, though it was clear it wouldn't keep out a determined squirrel, let alone a bear. After double-checking that the solid inner door was securely locked, they retreated to their bedroom, though neither expected to get much sleep for the remainder of the night. "Should one of us stay up and keep watch?" Megan asked as they settled back into bed, the adrenaline of the encounter still coursing through her system. "I don't think that's necessary," David replied, though he didn't sound entirely convinced. "The officer said he was going to patrol the area, and the bear has probably moved on now that it's been disturbed." Despite his reassurances, they both found sleep elusive, starting at every creak of the cabin's wooden structure or rustle from the surrounding forest. Megan found herself straining to hear any sound that might indicate the bear's return, while simultaneously checking the time every few minutes, willing morning to arrive faster. Eventually, exhaustion overcame vigilance, and they both drifted into uneasy sleep for the remaining few hours of the night. When Megan's alarm went off at 7 a.m., it felt as though she had barely closed her eyes. The morning light revealed the full extent of the bear's visit. The porch was a mess of torn packaging, scattered clothing, and damaged luggage. The garbage can, though still secured with Officer Martinez's bungee cord, showed clear signs of the bear's attempts to access it again after they had gone back inside. "Wow, what happened?" Emma asked, wide-eyed, when she emerged from her bedroom to find her parents already up and cleaning the porch. Megan and David exchanged a glance, silently debating how much to share. "We had a visitor last night," David finally explained, keeping his tone casual. "A bear came by and got into some of our bags that we left on the porch." "A bear?" Tyler exclaimed, appearing behind his sister, instantly wide awake at this news. "The same one from the park?" "We think so," Megan confirmed, seeing no point in hiding this detail. "But don't worry, we called the wildlife officer and he came to help us. The bear is gone now." The children had a multitude of questions, of course, and were visibly disappointed that they had slept through such an exciting event. As they helped clean up, with Tyler collecting a bear-mangled granola bar wrapper as a souvenir, David explained how bears are attracted to human food and why it's important to store food properly in bear country. "That's why we always have to put our trash in proper bins and never leave food outside," he concluded, turning the frightening nighttime encounter into an educational opportunity. Their departure from the cabin was delayed by the cleanup and the need to repack their belongings in whatever containers had survived the bear's investigation. They also spent time speaking with the cabin rental manager, who arrived after they called to report the damaged screen door. "I'm sorry this happened," the manager, a middle-aged woman named Carol, said sincerely. "We do warn guests about bears in the area, but it's unusual for them to come right up to the cabins like this." She took photos of the damage for insurance purposes and assured them they wouldn't be charged for the broken door. "The wildlife officer dropped by this morning as well," she added. "He mentioned you had encountered what might be the same bear earlier in your vacation." Megan confirmed this, recounting their experience at Promised Land State Park. Carol nodded thoughtfully. "I'll pass this information along to the other cabin owners in the area. If it's the same bear, it's developing some concerning habits." By the time they finally loaded their repacked belongings into the SUV, it was nearly 11 a.m., their planned departure time. Despite the eventful night and disrupted morning, the children were in high spirits, excited about their planned stop at the Aviation Museum and eager to tell their friends back home about their bear adventures. "Can we still go to the museum?" Tyler asked as they pulled away from the cabin, clearly concerned that the morning's delays might have altered their plans. "Absolutely," David assured him, checking the navigation system. "It's right on our way home, and we have plenty of time." As any, they drove away from Silver Pine Cabins, leaving the Pocono Mountains behind. Megan found herself reflecting on their vacation. It certainly hadn't gone entirely as planned, with the unexpected bear encounters adding an element of drama they hadn't anticipated. Yet somehow, those very incidents had become central to their vacation story, the events they would remember and recount for years to come. "You're quiet," David observed after they had been driving for about 20 minutes, the children engaged with books in the back seat. Megan smiled, turning to look at him. "Just thinking about our vacation, it was quite an adventure, wasn't it?" "That's one word for it," David agreed with a chuckle. "Not exactly the peaceful forest retreat I had in mind when I booked the cabin." "No," Megan conceded, "but the kids loved it. Well, most of it. And despite everything, I think I did too." They shared a knowing look, the kind that passes between partners who have weathered an unexpected challenge together and emerged with a story to tell. The Aviation Museum provided a welcome final activity for their vacation, with Tyler particularly entranced by the vintage aircraft on display. By the time they reached their home in Morristown late that afternoon, the bear encounters had already been transformed in the children's retellings into epic adventures of survival and daring. "And then the bear was on our porch trying to break down the door," Tyler exclaimed to their neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, who had come over to welcome them home and return their spare house key. "It wasn't quite that dramatic," Megan clarified, with an apologetic smile toward Mrs. Henderson, who looked appropriately concerned. "The bear was interested in our food, not us." "Still, how frightening," Mrs. Henderson remarked. "I suppose that's the risk of vacationing in the wilderness." "The Poconos hardly qualify as wilderness," David pointed out good-naturedly as he carried bags into the house. "It's one of the most popular vacation areas in the Northeast. Bears are just part of the ecosystem there." After unpacking and settling back into their home, the family ordered pizza for dinner, none of them having the energy to cook after the long drive. As they ate in their familiar dining room, the conversation naturally turned to the start of the new school year, just 2 weeks away, and the various tasks that needed to be completed before then. "I'm going to write about our bear for my what I did this summer essay," Emma declared, already planning her academic approach to their adventure. "Me too," Tyler chimed in, never wanting to be outdone by his sister. "And I'm going to draw pictures of it." "Just remember to stick to the facts," Megan cautioned, envisioning the potentially exaggerated accounts their teachers might receive. The bear was interesting enough without making it into a monster. Later that evening, after the children were in bed, Megan found herself examining the scratches on her hand, minor injuries from when she had reached to secure their belongings on the porch and caught her hand on the damaged screen door. The cuts were superficial, barely breaking the skin, but they served as a tangible reminder of their encounter. David found her in the bathroom, applying antiseptic to the scratches. "Battle wounds?" he asked, leaning against the doorframe. "Hardly," Megan replied with a smile. "Just a souvenir, I guess." David nodded toward her hand. "You should take a picture for Emma's vacation journal. Physical evidence of your bear encounter." "It wasn't really from the bear," Megan pointed out. "Just from the door it damaged." "Close enough," David shrugged. "It's all part of the same story." And so it was that the next day, before the minor scratches had a chance to fade, Megan took a photo of her hand to include in Emma's vacation journal, a small tangible connection to their Pocono adventure. The children, already back to playing with neighborhood friends, were enthusiastically recounting their bear encounters, each telling growing slightly more dramatic with each retelling. Megan returned to work the following week, the summer break over and a new school year beginning. During a lunch break in the teacher's lounge, she shared the story of their vacation excitement with her colleagues. "You actually saw a bear?" "Up close?" asked Jen, a fellow science teacher, her eyes wide with interest. "Twice, actually," Megan confirmed. "The same one, we think. First at a picnic site in Promised Land State Park, and then later it showed up at our rental cabin." Were you terrified?" asked Dan, a history teacher who freely admitted his aversion to anything with more than 4 legs or sharp teeth. Megan considered the question. "In the moment, yes," she admitted, "especially at the cabin, knowing the kids were asleep inside. But looking back, it was actually, I don't know, fascinating in a way. Seeing this wild animal going about its business, just doing what bears do." "Which is eating your vacation snacks, apparently," Jen commented with a laugh. "Pretty much," Megan agreed good-naturedly. The ranger, or wildlife officer actually, said it was a young male, probably around 3 years old, just figuring out his territory and finding food sources. "Did they catch it?" Dan asked. Megan shook her head. "No, they don't usually relocate them unless they become genuinely dangerous. This one was just interested in food, not people." The conversation soon shifted to other summer adventures and the upcoming school year, but Megan found herself thinking about the bear throughout the day. She wondered where it was now, whether it had continued its exploration of human settlements or returned to more natural foraging habits. She hoped, for the bear's sake, that it had found a balance, one that would keep it safe from the consequences of becoming too comfortable around humans. That evening, as she was preparing dinner, she noticed a small article in the local Pocono newspaper they had picked up during their vacation and brought home. The headline caught her eye: "Increased bear activity prompts warning from wildlife officials." The key article detailed several recent bear encounters in the Pocono region, including sightings at Promised Land State Park and around rental cabins near Lake Wallenpaupack. While it didn't specifically mention their encounters, Megan couldn't help but wonder if their bear was among those referenced. "Hey, listen to this," she called to David, who was helping Emma with a summer reading assignment in the living room. She read the article aloud, noting the wildlife official's advice for residents and visitors regarding proper food storage and garbage disposal. "Sounds like our friend has been busy," David remarked when she finished. "Probably not just our bear," Megan pointed out. "The article says bear sightings are up throughout the region this summer. Still, I bet he's responsible for at least some of those incidents," David said. "He seemed to have quite a talent for finding human food." The article concluded with a reminder that black bears were an important part of the Pocono ecosystem and that most conflicts could be prevented through proper precautions. It was a perspective Megan appreciated, recognizing the bears' rightful place in their habitat while acknowledging the challenges of human-wildlife coexistence. Over the following weeks, as summer transitioned into fall and the vacation receded further into memory, the bear encounters became favorite family stories, trotted out at dinners with friends or family gatherings. Each telling polished the narrative a bit more, emphasizing different aspects depending on who was telling it. Emma's version focused on the bear's behavior and habitat, reflecting her scientific interests and the research she had done for her school project on black bears. Tyler's account grew more dramatic with each telling, the bear inevitably becoming larger and more menacing, though always defeated by the family's clever strategies. David emphasized the uniqueness of the experience, the opportunity to observe a wild animal in its natural behavior, and Megan's version centered on the family's reactions, how they had worked together to handle an unexpected situation safely. By the time Thanksgiving arrived, and they gathered with extended family at Megan's parents' home in upstate New York, the bear story had achieved legendary status in the Foster family lore. "Tell everyone about the bear, Mom," Tyler urged as they sat around the dining table, prompting indulgent smiles from grandparents and polite interest from cousins who had likely heard some version of the story already. Megan obliged, recounting the picnic encounter first, then the cabin visit, careful to keep the details accurate. Despite the children's occasional attempts to interject more dramatic elements, she showed a small scar on her hand that had remained from the screen door scratch, which Tyler insisted on calling her bear scar, despite her corrections. "Well, it sounds like you all handled it very sensibly," Megan's father commented when she finished. "Black bears usually aren't looking for trouble. That's what the wildlife officer told us," David agreed. "They're after food, not confrontation." "Still," Megan's mother interjected, "it must have been frightening, especially with the children there." Megan nodded. "It was alarming in the moment," she acknowledged, "but it also gave us a new appreciation for wildlife and conservation." Emma even did her science project on black bear habitat loss and how it contributes to increased human-bear interactions. Emma beamed at the mention of her project, which had earned an A and a special commendation from her science teacher for its thorough research and thoughtful conclusions. The conversation eventually drifted to other topics, but later that evening, as Megan was helping her mother clean up in the kitchen, the subject of the bear returned. "You know," her mother said, handing Megan a dish to dry, "your father and I worried about you taking the children to such a remote area. We never said anything because we knew you and David had it all planned out, but I'm glad nothing worse happened with that bear." Megan smiled at her mother's belated concern. "It wasn't really remote, Mom. The Poconos are full of vacationers, and honestly, I think the experience was good for all of us. It connected us to something. I don't know, something more real than our usual suburban existence." Her mother looked skeptical but didn't press the point. "Well, as long as you're not planning to go camping in Alaska next year, there are bears there that make your black bear look like a teddy bear." "No plans for Alaska," Megan assured her with a laugh. "Though David is already talking about the Shenandoah National Park for next summer, more bears but also waterfalls and great hiking trails." As winter settled over New Jersey, the bear story became a less frequent topic of conversation, replaced by holiday plans and school activities. But occasionally, something would trigger a memory: a nature documentary featuring black bears, a news item about wildlife in the Poconos, or simply the sight of the damaged duffel bag they had never quite gotten around to replacing. In late January, Megan was surprised to receive an email from Officer Martinez of the Pennsylvania Game Commission. He had followed up on their bear encounter as part of a larger study on human-wildlife interactions in the Pocono region and wanted to provide an update. The email explained that based on their report and several others from the same area, wildlife, officials had identified a specific young male black bear that had been displaying increasingly bold behavior around human settlements. After multiple incidents of property damage and food theft, the bear had eventually been trapped and relocated to a more remote area of the state forest, far from popular tourist areas. While we prefer to allow wildlife to remain in their established territories, Officer Martinez wrote, this individual had become too habituated to human food sources and was at risk of developing more problematic behaviors. Relocation gives him a chance to establish new, more natural foraging patterns away from human temptation. The email concluded with thanks for their detailed report, which had helped establish the pattern of behavior that led to the intervention, and an invitation to contact the Game Commission if they had any questions. Megan shared the email with David that evening after the children were in bed. So they did end up relocating him, David remarked after reading it. I wonder if he'll adapt to his new home or find his way back to where the easy food is. The officer seems to think there's a chance he'll develop better habits away from people, Megan replied, though she too wondered about the bear's fate. I hope it works out for him. It's better than the alternative, David pointed out. Bears that consistently cause problems sometimes end up being euthanized, especially if they become aggressive. Megan nodded, finding herself oddly invested in the outcome for this animal that had so briefly but memorably intersected with their lives. I'm glad they're giving him another chance. She decided to share a simplified version of the update with the children the next day, emphasizing the conservation aspects rather than the bear's problem behavior. Emma, in particular, was interested in the relocation process, asking detailed questions about how they determined where to release the bear and how they monitored its adaptation to the new area. So he's getting a fresh start? Tyler asked after Megan had explained as much as she knew. That's right, she confirmed. He's in a new part of the forest where he can find natural foods instead of human food. Tyler considered this solemnly. I hope he's not lonely there. The comment caught Megan by surprise, an empathetic perspective she hadn't anticipated from her 6-year-old. I don't think bears get lonely the way people do, she explained gently. They usually prefer to be on their own except mothers with cubs. This seemed to satisfy Tyler, and the conversation moved on to other topics, but Megan found herself touched by her son's concern for the animal that had disrupted their vacation. Despite the fear and inconvenience of the encounters, the experience had clearly fostered a connection to wildlife in both children, an unexpected benefit of their Pocono adventure. As winter thawed into spring and plans for the upcoming summer, vacation began to take shape. Shenandoah National Park had indeed won out as their destination. The bear story gradually became part of their family history, one of those defining experiences that family members reference with a knowing look or a shorthand phrase. Remember the bear became a family code for unexpected situations or plans gone awry, usually followed by laughter and a reminder that some of the best stories come from the unplanned moments. The physical reminders of their encounter gradually faded. The small scar on Megan's hand disappeared completely. The damaged luggage was eventually replaced, and even Emma's detailed vacation journal was shelved as new adventures were recorded. But the memory remained vivid, a shared experience that had in some subtle way shaped their family narrative. In early June, as the school year was winding down, Megan was collecting final assignments from her science students when a news alert on her phone caught her attention. The headline read, Black bear spotted at Delaware Water Gap Recreation Area. The brief article reported a black bear sighting by hikers on a Powers was relocated. I know, Megan acknowledged. It's silly to think it might be the same one. And yet, David smiled, understanding the connection she felt to their particular bear. And yet, you can't help but wonder. I get it. As they finalized plans for their upcoming trip to Shenandoah, Megan found herself incorporating lessons learned from their Pocono adventure, researching proper food storage techniques for bear country, planning meals that would minimize attractive odors, and reviewing what to do in case of a wildlife encounter. This time they would be prepared. We should get a bear-proof cooler, David suggested, as they reviewed their equipment list. They make them specially reinforced to resist curious claws. And maybe brush up on our canoe emergency exits, Megan added with a smile, remembering Tyler's concern about bears while they were on Lake Wallenpaupack. The memory of their bear encounters, far from deterring them from future outdoor adventures, had instead informed their approach, making them more knowledgeable, more respectful of wildlife, and perhaps more appreciative of the unpredictable nature of true wilderness experiences. On the last day of school, as Megan was packing up her classroom for the summer, she came across Emma's science project on black bears, which had been returned by her teacher with a glowing evaluation. Flipping through the carefully researched pages, she paused at a section titled My Bear Encounter, where Emma had included their family photo from the Pocono vacation alongside a remarkably accurate account of their experiences. The final paragraph caught Megan's attention. Even though it was scary when the bear came to our cabin, I'm glad it happened. It helped me understand that bears are just animals trying to find food and survive, not monsters from stories. We need to be careful and respect their space, but we also need to protect the forests where they live so they don't have to come looking for food from people. Reading her daughter's words, Megan felt a surge of pride and a deepened appreciation for what their vacation misadventure had taught them all. The bear had walked away from their last encounter, disappearing back into the forest that was its true home, but it had left behind more than damaged luggage and a brief moment of fear. It had left them with a story, a connection to the natural world, and perhaps most importantly, a reminder that the most memorable experiences often come from the moments when plans give way to the unexpected. As she placed Emma's project in her bag to take home, Megan smiled at the thought of their upcoming Shenandoah adventure. Whatever experiences awaited them there, bear-related or otherwise, they would face them with the confidence and perspective gained from their Pocono encounter, ready to add another chapter to their family story.